Martial Peak, Chapter 5996, Defeat. The Azure Dragon Spear was given to Yang Kai by Ada when he was still living in the Star Boundary. In other words, the spear had accompanied him for thousands of years, during which they experienced numerous battles and slaughtered countless enemies together. As the spear was an artifact refined from the body of a divine, its grade was so high that it was practically unmatched. Be that as it may, Mo had managed to cause a crack to appear in such an amazing spear. It was easy to imagine the intensity of this battle. After all, even the body of a divine dragon could not withstand the force of Mo's attacks. After the first crack appeared on the spear, a second and third crack quickly followed. It did not take long before the entire body of the spear was covered in fine cracks. The spear was on the verge of shattering to pieces. When Mo noticed the cracks on the spear, a hint of mockery appeared in his eyes and his attacks became fiercer and fiercer. Yang Kai suppressed the reluctance in his heart and summoned his Tao strengths with all his might. Then, he thrust out with his spear. As soon as the violent forces collided with each other, the impact caused his body to freeze for a moment. The spear that had accompanied him for thousands of years simultaneously shattered into a million pieces in his hand. Mo had been waiting for this very opportunity. When the Azure Dragon Spear shattered to pieces, he jumped forward and punched Yang Kai. This punch was meant to become the deciding factor of this battle. He strongly believed that Yang Kai would be forced to avoid his blows after losing his weapon. If that was the case, then he could steadily press forward and gain complete control over the flow of the battle until Yang Kai became powerless to fight back. Contrary to expectations though, Yang Kai did not retreat from the blow even after the Azure Dragon Spear shattered to pieces. The space-time river, which was originally wrapped around the body of the spear, seemed to have gained spirituality and clung tightly to his arms. Facing Mo's attack directly, Yang Kai threw a punch in Mo's direction. The Tao strengths fluctuated violently. At the moment when both forces collided with each other, a powerful impact manifested as a visible halo of light centered around the two opponents flashed. The halo of light swiftly spread out in all directions. Everywhere the light passed, space shattered and collapsed. It was quickly followed by the appearance of numerous enormous void cracks. The Ninth Order Masters who had arrived at the periphery of the battlefield turned pale with fright. Faced with the approaching fallout of the battle, they quickly summoned their strength to defend themselves against the impact. Nevertheless, they were still sent flying. They, who were no longer at their peak strength, were instantly thrown into disarray by the impact. Luckily, the two giant spirit gods stood in front of them and bore the brunt of the shockwave. It was only thanks to the protection of Ada and Aer that there were no casualties. Once the effects of the aftermath passed, they couldn't help looking slightly flustered and bitter. They originally came here intending to help Yang Kai. Halfway into the journey, the Allied army was forced to stop at a distance and discontinue their forward march because the troops could not withstand the overwhelming pressure of the battle. At this moment, they were horrified to discover that even Ninth Order Masters like themselves could not approach the battlefield. They would be torn apart by the aftermath of such powerful attacks. As things stood, the only ones who could be depended upon were the two giant spirit gods, Ada and Aer. Mi Jingluan looked up at the two behemoths and instantly realized that the two giant spirit gods could not be counted on either. The survivors were exhausted after the arduous battle. Even Ada and Aer were no exception. While the two giant spirit gods managed to resist the shockwave just now, they were still pushed back significantly by the impact. Under these circumstances, it was impossible for any of them to intervene in the battle. They would only be a burden for Yang Kai if they recklessly charged forward. Mi Jingluan was abruptly struck by a saddening realization. The only thing they could do after coming here was to witness the unique battle with their own eyes. That was an unimaginably heartbreaking truth. When the aftermath fully dissipated, everyone looked towards the battlefield from behind Ada and Aer. The scene that greeted them made their hearts tighten with fear. Yang Kai was steadily being pushed back, seemingly at a complete disadvantage. Compared to an ancient entity like Mo, Yang Kai's heritage was simply too shallow. The slightest negligence or careless mistake could become fatal. Waste. During the battle, Mo suddenly yelled in frustration. Yang Kai flew backwards like an arrow released from the bowstring following a vicious strike. The space-time river wrapped around his arm suddenly emerged behind him and he fell into the river, diffusing some of the impacts from the blow. It did not take long before he stepped out of the river once more. His complexion was pale, and a trickle of blood dripped from the corners of his mouth. Mo did not pursue Yang Kai. He simply stared coldly and calmly stated, "My offer from before still stands. Give up your feudal resistance and hand over Mu's inheritance. I guarantee that the human race will have a place to live in the future." Yang Kai turned his head to the side and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he grinned wickedly, "Kill me, then you can deal with the human race as you please." Mo closed his eyes gently. When he opened them once more, his murderous intent overflowed. He did not bother to speak again, and his figure abruptly vanished from where he was standing. By the time he reappeared again, he was already standing in front of Yang Kai. The sudden disappearance and reappearance were not a trick of space principles, rather, his speed had simply reached such an extreme. Yang Kai did not seem surprised by these movements. With a backward grab, the space-time river that was originally flowing behind him transformed into a whip and appeared in his hand. The long whip then lashed out towards Mo. Mo frowned slightly but did not dodge aside, he simply threw a punch instead. The punch struck Yang Kai squarely in the head. The blow made his head arch backwards, and his skull seemed to crack from the impact. He was immediately drenched in blood, nevertheless, the long whip wrapped around Mo. Standing so close to each other, the blood-drenched Yang Kai grinned at Mo, "I finally caught you." He seemed to have been waiting for this moment. After he finished speaking, he gave the long whip in his hand a sharp flick. The space-time river manifested once more, and the raging currents instantly engulfed the two figures. Before their figures vanished from view, the masters standing in the distance vaguely heard Mo's mocking voice sounding in their ears, "Since you're so eager to die, I will fulfill your wishes." Afterwards, the space-time river that stretched out into the void suddenly boiled and bubbled violently. Meanwhile, the Grand Tao's strengths trembled agitatedly. These were the results of the battle between Yang Kai and Mo in the space-time river. The Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters couldn't help being extremely nervous at the sight. The space-time river was the condensed crystallization of Yang Kai's 10,000 Grand Taos. Even if fighting in the space-time river would give him a considerable advantage over his opponent, that was not enough to overcome the fact that Mo's cultivation was in a higher realm than his. Besides, the Ninth Order Open Heaven Realm Masters had seen the previous battle with their own eyes. Under Mo's powerful offensive, Yang Kai could only parry and defend at most, he had no strength to fight back whatsoever. That was the result of the undeniable gap in their strengths. Rashly dragging his enemy into the space-time river was both an opportunity and a danger. If he failed to defeat Mo in the space-time river, then he would not be able to guarantee his own safety in the space-time river. The churning of the river waters became increasingly turbulent. Waves rose and fell, splashing around fiercely. At the same time, countless Tao strengths appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Although the Ninth Order Masters could not see the ongoing battle, they could deduce that Yang Kai was at a disadvantage just by looking at the changes in the space-time river. The situation lasted for several days. The Ninth Order Masters were about to rush forward to help when the churning river suddenly turned calm. With their hearts in their throats, they watched the space-time river intently. They knew that the outcome of the battle had been decided. Mi Jingluan immediately sent a transmission to his companions, ordering them to be ready for action at any time. A figure suddenly stepped out of the river. To their horror, the figure that stepped out turned out to be not one but two figures. Mo held Yang Kai by the head, dragging him with one hand. Yang Kai hung limply from Mo's grasp as though every bone in his body had been broken. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5997, Spacetime Shadow. Standing above the spacetime river, Mo held Yang Kai's head as though holding a chicken in his grasp and snorted, "Useless waste. You don't have the right to continue living." Then, he abruptly exerted great strength in his hand. How could Yang Kai, who had lost his ability to fight, withstand such an attack? His head instantly exploded from the impact. However, Mo did not stop there. It punched out and smashed the crippled body to pieces. The scene was imprinted in the eyes of the Ninth Order Masters who were watching the battle from afar. They stood frozen in shock and stared in disbelief. Yang Kai died. The man who was the best at creating miracles and turning the tides of war countless times. The man who had saved the human race from various catastrophes. Did he die just like that? They instinctively refused to believe the scene before them and subconsciously wondered whether they were looking at an illusion. However, the dissipation of his aura that followed the destruction of his body could not be faked. Everything indicated that he was really dead. Yang Kai had died at the hands of Mo. Only a short moment had passed from the time Yang Kai was dragged out of the spacetime river by Mo. Moreover, Mo had not hesitated in the slightest when he killed Yang Kai. Everything happened so quickly that the Ninth Order Masters had no time to even think about rescuing Yang Kai. A shrill but mournful phoenix cry rang out, accompanied by a furious dragon roar. Su Yen and Yang Shao transformed into their divine spirit forms and charged towards Mo. The rest of the Ninth Order Masters also followed suit and sprang into action. Despite knowing that they were no match for Mo, nobody hesitated in the slightest. Now that Yang Kai was dead, there was nobody in this world who could compete with Mo. Black Ink's strength would soon gain complete control over the universe. When that happened, the human race would no longer have a place to live. This was the final struggle. Su Yen was the fastest. After all, the Tao of Space was the bloodline talent of the Phoenix clan. She had lost her mind after being consumed by her feelings of rage and sorrow. At this moment, there was only one thought left in her heart. She wanted revenge, and if she could not have it, she would accompany Yang Kai to the afterlife. A gorgeous trail of light lingered behind the enormous blue figure. With a few flickers, she arrived on the battlefield. However, a bizarre phenomenon occurred before she could unleash her strength. Ripples suddenly emerged in the originally calm spacetime river. Following the splashing waves, a figure leapt out. Upon seeing the appearance of the figure, Su Yen froze in shock. Even the Ninth Order Masters behind her were dumbfounded by the sight. The figure who stepped out from the spacetime river was none other than Yang Kai, who should have been killed by Mo earlier. He's alive. Everybody stared at the scene in front of them in disbelief. Their reactions were similar to when they watched Yang Kai being killed just now. He had clearly died right before their very eyes, and his death had not been an illusion. Nevertheless, he just walked out of the spacetime river alive. The bizarre phenomenon was beyond their comprehension. This kind of resurrection after death was simply impossible. After stepping out from the surging waves, Yang Kai immediately noticed Su Yen and the others. He seemed to have anticipated the current situation and breathed out deeply, "I'm glad I made it back in time." Step back. Su Yen, who had transformed into an ice phoenix, only hesitated for a brief moment before she turned around and retreated backwards. She also manipulated space principles and quickly transported the people behind her away from the battlefield. The Ninth Order Masters were forcefully returned to their previous positions. This location could barely be considered safe from the aftermath of the battle. Xiang Shan frowned deeply. What just happened? Yang Kai had clearly been killed, so how did he come back alive from the spacetime river? Although Xiang Shan had lived for many years, he had never encountered such a bizarre sight before. A light flashed through Mi Jing Luan's eyes. Creation realm. Could it be the mysteries of the creation realm? What do you mean? Oh, Yang Lai raised an eyebrow at those words. Are you saying that Yang Kai has stepped into the creation realm? Mi Jingluan shook his head. It doesn't seem like it. The young Kai who stepped out of the space-time river only had the aura of a ninth-order master. It did not seem as though he had ascended to a new realm. Be that as it may, Mi Jingluan had no other explanation for the bizarre phenomenon that they just witnessed. What's more, could reaching the creation realm really allow one to revive from the dead? It was simply outrageous and inconceivable. On the battlefield, Missouri watched Yang Kai reappear from the space-time river and turned to look at the scattered pieces of the dismembered body. After confirming that he had indeed slaughtered Yang Kai earlier, he immediately understood the situation. A shadow? Yang Kai smiled at Emo. I can't fool your eyes after all. Mu and Emo had lived together for such a long time. It was only natural for Emo to know about Mu's methods. Besides, two identical individuals could not exist together unless they originated from different spacetimes. Mu's shadow technique had transcended the limits of the mundane. In order to suppress and seal Mo's source, she had divided her entire life into 3,000 shadows to protect the 3,000 universe worlds inside her spacetime river. Each shadow represented a part of her past, an illusion of sorts that was also real and tangible. Yang Kai had obtained Mu's final gift. Devouring and refining her spacetime river had allowed him to massively increase the volume of his own spacetime river. At the same time, he also enhanced and improved his attainments and comprehension of the 10,000 Grand Daos. The benefits he received were enormous. Nevertheless, those were not his greatest gains. The greatest benefit he obtained was Mu's shadow technique. That secret technique was definitely the pinnacle of the mysteries of the Grand Daos. After fighting Mo, Yang Kai had deeply understood that he was no match for his opponent. That was because he could not overcome his limits and advance to a higher realm within a short time. As long as he could not advance to a higher realm, then his battle with Mo would only end with his defeat and death. Be that as it may, he could not afford to die. The human race would be doomed if he fell here. Since he had no means to advance to the next realm within a short time, his only chance of victory was to master Mu's shadow technique. Just one or two of him could not compete with Mo, but what about 3 of him? Or 5? Or 10? Mastering the mysterious shadow technique was Yang Kai's only chance at defeating Mo, therefore, he had mainly been buying time during his previous fight with Mo so that he could integrate the many Dao strengths into his body completely. Mu had not been able to teach Yang Kai about the mystery behind the shadow technique. It was not that she had no intention to teach him the secret technique, on the contrary, it was a secret technique that resulted from reaching the pinnacle of the Grand Daos, so it was not something he could learn even if she tried to teach him. The secret technique was something he had to comprehend with his own abilities. Fortunately, Yang Kai had embarked on the same path as Mu. It was for that reason she believed that he would eventually comprehend the mysterious secret technique and understand her intentions for giving him her space-time river. Having come into contact with more than 2,000 of Mu's shadows, Yang Kai already had some vague ideas about the shadow technique before he devoured and refined Mu's space-time river. Furthermore, Mu's final gift had laid down a solid foundation for him. It was thanks to the foundation that he finally understood the secrets of the shadow technique and was able to perform it through his space-time river. There was no denying that Mo had killed him, but the one who died was a copy of himself who had existed at a certain time in the past. Nonetheless, the demise of a shadow was not without cost. Although it was Yang Kai's first time performing the shadow technique, he quickly noticed that something was wrong. He raised a hand to his head in confusion. It feels like I've forgotten something. He had completely lost his memories of the time during which the deceased shadow of him had existed. Never mind. It probably wasn't anything important. He gave a carefree laugh and looked up at Mo. Shall we go for round 2? Mo's lips curled upwards. His expression had been sullen throughout the battle with Yang Kai, as though he owed him a massive debt. He also repeatedly made rude and disparaging remarks, but he broke into a smile at this moment. Interesting. The interesting part has yet to come. As soon as the words left Yang Kai's mouth, the Dao strengths lingering around his body began to fluctuate. He arrived in front of Mo in the blink of an eye. The space-time river surged behind him. Raising his arm, Yang Kai summoned the Azure Dragon Spear and thrust it at Mo. The Azure Dragon Spear should have been destroyed, but the Azure Dragon Spear in the space-time that Yang Kai's shadow originated in remained intact. That was why the shattered spear could display its great strength once more. As before, the violent fallout produced by their exchange of blows continuously spread to the surroundings. The spectating Ninth Order masters couldn't help widening their eyes at the sight. They secretly rejoiced that Yang Kai had resurrected in time. With their strength, Mo would have effortlessly killed them if they had rushed forward at the time. It was initially assumed that Yang Kai would be able to persist for a long time even though the battle was not evenly matched in strength. After all, he had displayed his immense strength previously. Unexpectedly, the battle only lasted for 4 hours before Mo found an opening and slammed his fist into Yang Kai's chest. A gaping hole appeared in Yang Kai's chest, then his body exploded into pieces. His aura also swiftly dwindled away into nothing. Despite knowing that he would not experience a true death, the Ninth Order masters could not help being overwhelmed by sorrow at the sight. After eradicating Yang Kai's second shadow, Mo raised his eyes to look in the direction of the space-time river. He had lived with Mu for such a long time, so he was well aware of the shadow technique's strength. The true strength of the secret technique was not power, but the prominent ability to survive that was granted to the users of the secret technique. The shadow technique was created based on the space-time river, so the foundation of the secret technique was the space-time river itself. In order to completely eradicate a user of the shadow technique, the space-time river must first be destroyed, otherwise, the user of the shadow technique would never perish. For that reason, Mo immediately aimed for the space-time river as soon as he slaughtered Yang Kai's second shadow. Black ink strength around his body surged to cover the entire river. He planned to corrupt the entire space-time river with black ink strength in order to destroy Yang Kai's shadow technique. But before Mo could make a move, another of Yang Kai's shadow jumped out of the space-time river. Yang Kai instantly summoned the Azure Dragon Spear and launched himself at Mo. He even made a mocking remark, "Why are you in such a hurry?" The two figures resumed their vicious battle once more. During that time, Yang Kai fought Mo while gathering various information on the shadow technique. It was his first time performing the secret technique, so his understanding of it was quite lacking. He had to perfectly master the secret technique as soon as possible because that was the only way he could turn the situation around and obtain victory. If he only relied on a never-ending series of battles via his shadows, he would never be able to defeat Mo. However, Yang Kai would need to make countless attempts and gain experience from actual practice to perfectly master the secret technique as soon as possible. I've forgotten more things, but the memories I deliberately preserved have not been forgotten. That's good news, Yang Kai quietly muttered to himself and resumed battle against Mo. Although he was no match for Mo still, he no longer needed to worry about death. That was why he could afford to act more recklessly than before. Shortly afterwards, Yang Kai gained another important piece of information: the shorter the span of spacetime allocated, the weaker the shadow's fighting ability. That is certainly worth noting. When that thought passed through his mind, the strength of his shadow faltered. Yang Kai showed weaknesses in his defenses, so Mo instantly found an opening and slaughtered him. Blood rained all over the void. Despite witnessing similar scenes on several occasions already, the Ninth Order masters watching the battle from afar still widened their eyes at the sight. What reassured them was that the next Yang Kai had already leapt out of the spacetime river almost as soon as the previous Yang Kai died. Marshall Peak, Chapter 5998, Contribution from the Future. One after another, Yang Kai's shadows stepped out from the spacetime river only to perish at Mo's hands. There were no exceptions. The first one had survived the battle for over 4 hours. The second one lasted for less than 4 hours. As for the third, the battle had ended even faster. This is bad. Among those who were watching the battle from a distance, Mi Jingluan's expression turned solemn. He had noticed the issue at hand. It was an extremely serious issue. Although Yang Kai's shadows were endless in supply, his strength seemed to be weakening over time. It was as though time was flowing backwards for him, causing his condition to return to an earlier period with each shadow. At this moment, Yang Kai's aura was only comparable to a newly advanced Ninth Order master, hence, he was effortlessly slaughtered by Mo as soon as he stepped out from the space-time river. If the situation continued in this manner, he would not even be able to maintain his cultivation in the Ninth Order. If that were to happen, Mo would be able to exterminate him without even breaking a sweat, no matter how many shadows were to appear. Another one of Yang Kai's shadows in the newly advanced Ninth Order stepped out from the space-time river. Raising a hand, Mo captured the shadow in its grasp and stared at Yang Kai faintly. "You're a disgrace to Mu's legacy." Yang Kai did not panic even though he was captured by Mo. After the repeated deaths of his shadows, he was now very familiar with the feeling of death. Raising an eyebrow at those words, he denied the statement. "That might not be true." Mo looked surprised. "Do you have another trick up your sleeve?" Yang Kai grinned. "Indeed, a trick you've never seen before." "Very good." Mo made a faint smile. While saying so, he exerted some strength into his grip and crushed the shadow in his grasp. In the next moment, another Yang Kai leapt out from the space-time river. However, the aura lingering around him was different this time. Something had obviously changed as his aura was once again at the peak of his strength. If the foundation of the shadow technique was said to be the space-time river, then the core of the secret technique was the user of the selected space-time. In Yang Kai's case, he was manipulating the 10,000 Dao strengths with his self from this space-time as the core and his space-time river as the foundation. That was how he gained the ability to summon shadows from previous space-time periods. All those who were slaughtered by Mo previously were his shadows, however, the one who walked out of the space-time river now was his main body. It was the him of the current space-time. The foundation and core were extremely important to the shadow technique, therefore, it was necessary to destroy both aspects to overcome it. Mo had initially wanted to refine the space-time river but was hindered by Yang Kai's numerous shadows, which prevented it from taking action. However, he saw a ray of hope when Yang Kai's main body emerged from the space-time river. The shadow technique would be destroyed as long as the Yang Kai standing before him was eliminated. But, could it be that simple? For Yang Kai's main body to emerge from the space-time river at this point. His actions certainly seemed like a desperate move. After all, the shadows that he summoned earlier had been cleanly eradicated. If he summoned any more shadows from earlier space-time periods, he would only have the cultivation of an 8th Order master, which would not be able to cause any trouble for Mo at all. Combining the situation with what Yang Kai mentioned just now, Mo had the vague feeling that Yang Kai was about to reveal his trump card. Oddly enough, he found himself looking forward to what was to come for some reason. Yang Kai did not disappoint. When his main body stepped out of the space-time river, he lightly chanted, "I offer 1,000 years of my past in exchange for a contribution from the future. Come." As soon as those words left his mouth, the space-time river behind him began to rumble turbulently. The enormous river abruptly shrunk by a large margin, then another of Yang Kai's shadow emerged from within the waters. Seeing this, Mo's eyes narrowed slightly. That was because the aura lingering around this shadow was slightly stronger than Yang Kai himself. That should have been impossible. It had to be said that the shadow technique was performed with oneself in the current spacetime as the core. For that reason, the summoned shadow could only be formed from oneself that existed in previous spacetimes. In other words, the summoned shadow should never be stronger than the main body, because the main body was ultimately the strongest. Be that as it may, an exception had appeared in Yang Kai's case. Mo instantly figured out the truth behind the situation and exclaimed in astonishment, "You summoned a shadow from the future." Only Yang Kai from the future could be stronger than the main body of Yang Kai, who existed in the current space-time. Mo did not remain idle when he raised this question. After realizing that Yang Kai's attainments in the shadow technique had surpassed Mu's, he knew that Yang Kai could not be allowed to continue, so he charged forward even while asking this question. In response, Yang Kai just stood calmly in place. On the other hand, the summoned shadow stepped forward and immediately engaged in an intense battle with Mo. Although he came from 1,000 years in the future, his strength was still limited even though he was slightly stronger than the main body. He was no match for Mo either, but he would have no trouble buying some time for Yang Kai. Furthermore, Yang Kai did not need much time. He then shouted again, "Come." A second shadow stepped out from the spacetime river. It was another Yang Kai who came from another 1,000 years into the future. When the second shadow appeared, the size of the spacetime river shrunk again. On the other hand, the aura of Yang Kai and the two shadows instantly became closely interconnected. A three fortunes formation was established. The aura of the second shadow was again stronger than the first. The first shadow had been steadily pushed back by Mo's intense assault, but his situation improved as soon as the three fortunes formation was established even though he remained at a disadvantage. Again. Yang Kai shouted. The dragon blood in his body boiled and churned, while at the same time, his face began to flush red. A third shadow stepped out from the spacetime river. Glancing at the main body, he nodded lightly before he directly charged onto the battlefield. The three fortunes formation also instantly transformed into the four symbols formation. Again. Golden blood trickled out of Yang Kai's nose as a fourth shadow emerged and the four symbols formation evolved into a five elements formation. Shadow after shadow emerged from the spacetime river without pause, only when the eighth shadow was summoned did Yang Kai finally stop. It was not that he no longer wanted to continue, but rather that the volume of his spacetime river would shrink by a certain extent whenever he summoned a shadow from the future, and the spacetime river had vanished completely after he summoned the eighth shadow. He had reached the absolute limit of his shadow technique. At this moment, Yang Kai's main body was bleeding from all 7 of his orifices. It was evident that he had endured tremendous pressure in order to pull this feat off. The shadows that appeared towards the end possessed increasingly powerful auras. When the sixth shadow emerged, its aura had already reached the absolute peak of the ninth order. It was a stage that even Yang Kai's main body had not achieved. The seventh and the eighth shadows also had auras at the peak of the ninth order, but their auras had become even more profound. Looking at Mo, who was being besieged and steadily repelled by the shadows on the battlefield, Yang Kai smiled even though he was covered in blood. In truth, the shadows were already capable of fighting Mo on an equal footing when the Six Paths formation was formed, therefore, Mo's situation then became more and more critical when it later evolved to become the 7 stars, 8 trigrams, and ultimately 9 palaces formation. The ones who established the battle formation were all Yang Kais. To be more precise, they were Yang Kais from future spacetimes. This was a feat that even Mu could not achieve. Her shadow technique could only summon shadows of her past because her spacetime river was incomplete, but that was not the case for Yang Kai. His spacetime river had been perfected, so the power of the shadow technique he wielded was even more terrifying. Martial Peak, Chapter 5999, Clash of the Strongest. Each shadow represented a Yang Kai from subsequent 1,000-year periods in the future. In other words, the 8 shadows represented 8,000 years worth of future spacetime. These 8 shadows combined with Yang Kai's main body to establish the 9 palaces formation. For that reason, the power of the battle formation was even greater than the 9 palaces formation formed between Zhang Ruoxi and her 8 personal guard. Zhang Ruoxi, who had harmonized the power of yin and yang with her heaven's order bloodline, was certainly stronger than any of Yang Kai's individual shadows. Be that as it may, the strength of the 8 personal guards had held her back. Taking the overall situation into account, Yang Kai's Nine Palaces formation was undoubtedly the strongest Nine Palaces formations that had appeared on the battlefield. Moreover, the difference in strength was significant. After establishing the Nine Palaces formation, Yang Kai's main body took a step forward and charged towards Mo with the combined strength of the other 8 shadows. The 6 Paths formation was already sufficient for Yang Kai to fight Mo on even terms, so the 7 Stars formation and 8 Trigrams formations had left Mo at a complete disadvantage. At this moment, Yang Kai was practically invincible thanks to the 9 Palaces formation. With the combined forces of the main body in 8 shadows, Mo was powerless against their intense assault. Black blood and black ink strength splattered everywhere. The 9 Yang Kais moved around swiftly, each one of them having mastered the 10,000 Grand Daos. As they were shadows of Yang Kai himself, there was no need for them to worry about their cooperation. The connection between the shadows was so close and firm that there were no flaws in their movements at all. Mo naturally wanted to break free, but it was not easy to escape the besiegement of the battle formation. The Ninth Order Masters watching the battle from afar were stunned. Nobody could have imagined that such a strange scene would appear during the final battle. The mysteries of the shadow technique had exceeded their comprehension and imagination. Looking at the current situation, they couldn't help feeling hopeful and excited. That was because they finally saw a glimpse of hope in defeating Mo. In the past, the issue of defeating Mo had always been a plague to the human race. Although they never deliberately avoided the topic, the reality was that they simply did not have sufficient means or strength to oppose Mo. Zhang Ruoxi's support had certainly been a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, even she was not strong enough to compete with Mo in battle. The battle on the main battlefield was over, and the entire Black Ink clan had been obliterated. If Yang Kai could defeat Mo, then the Black Ink crisis that had been plaguing the human race since the late ancient era would be resolved in one fell swoop. A bright future was awaiting the human race. The light would eventually expunge all darkness. However, the veteran Ninth Order Masters soon began to look worried. The current situation might be favorable for them, but nobody knew what price Yang Kai had paid to wield the shadow technique like this. Seeing as the secret technique far exceeded his own abilities, the price he paid would correspond to the strength he obtained. In other words, the greater the strength Yang Kai obtained, the greater the price he had to pay. Furthermore, they did not know how long he could persevere in such an intense battle. The truth was just as they feared. Yang Kai had indeed paid an unimaginable price to wield the shadow technique in such a fashion. His body was also forced to bear the incredible pressure that came from obtaining strength that exceeded his own abilities. In other words, he could not maintain this state for long. He had to finish this battle as soon as possible, and for that reason, he did not hesitate to join the battle himself just to defeat Mo a little faster. Mo was steadily being pushed back under the suppression of the Nine Palaces formation. At this point, he was backed into a corner with no ability to fight back. The vexing situation infuriated Mo. As the ancient supreme being, he was a master who not only originated from the same era as Mu, but also once held the opportunity to reign over the entire universe. Even if more than 30% of his source had been suppressed and sealed, he could still not tolerate a junior acting so presumptuously in front of him, especially when this particular junior had stolen Mu's final legacy from him. Amid the intense battle, Mo abruptly turned to look in a certain direction and fixed his gaze on one of Yang Kai's figures. Naturally, it was Yang Kai's main body. The main body was easy to identify. Not only was the aura of the main body the weakest among the other shadows, but the appearance of the main body was also the most disheveled and worse for wear due to the effects of performing the shadow technique. To break the shadow technique, it was necessary to either destroy the space-time river that acted as the foundation or the main body that acted as the core. At this moment, the space-time river was nowhere to be seen because it had been evenly divided between Yang Kai's 8 shadows. In that case, Mo only had one option left. Mo turned to face the storm of attacks coming from so many shadows and disregarded the injuries he sustained, even when the strongest shadow chopped off his arm. In the end, the heavy price he paid was worthwhile indeed. He successfully broke out of the encirclement created by the shadows and arrived in front of Yang Kai's main body. Black Ink's strength surged. Raising his remaining hand, Mo blasted his fist at Yang Kai. The punch was quite a distance away from Yang Kai, nevertheless, the force of the punch was enough to cause space to shatter, time to stop, and the universe to collapse. The blow containing Mo's full strength could not be dodged or avoided. Mo could almost see Yang Kai's main body being smashed into paste, and a hint of triumph flashed through the fury in his eyes, but unexpectedly, the imagined scene did not appear. Despite the incoming blow, Yang Kai's main body did not show the slightest trace of panic. On the contrary, he stepped forward and threw himself in the direction of the blow. Mo was stunned by the strange turn of events. Meanwhile, Yang Kai's main body suddenly unleashed a burst of power that far exceeded his own strength. The force directly penetrated the shackles of space and caused the stagnant time to flow again. Then, he punched out at the same time. Damn it! Mo abruptly realized that he had fallen into a trap. For a long time now, the core of the Nine Palaces formation had always been sustained by the strongest shadow. Nevertheless, the fact that Yang Kai's main body could exert such a powerful burst of strength indicated that the core of the Nine Palaces formation could be transferred to the main body. The method to break the shadow technique was to defeat the body which existed in the current spacetime. That was something both Mo and Yang Kai knew. Seeing as the former was bound to target the main body, how could the latter not take precautions? It could even be said that Yang Kai had been waiting for this very moment. A violent force swept out, pushing Mo's figure backwards. In the meantime, the 8 shadows attacked from all directions. Dao's strengths fluctuated wildly, and the barrage of attacks left Mo staggering from the impact. If that were all, Mo's situation would have been bad enough. However, each of the 8 shadows actually exerted strength that far exceeded their limits with every blow that they unleashed. The position as core of the formation was constantly being transferred around. To be precise, the position as core was instantly transferred to whichever shadow was attacking Mo at the time. Such a feat would have been impossible to achieve if it was any other configuration for the makeup of the battle formation, but Yang Kai could freely transfer the position as core between his main body and his shadows without any obstruction. This was the same strategy that Zhang Ruoxi had carried out previously. She and her 8 personal guard had both been the cores and not the cores at the same time. Such a perfect 9 palaces formation could be said to have no flaws whatsoever. More importantly, there was no need to fear the weak links being targeted. In fact, there was only one method to destroy this battle formation, which was to totally annihilate it by brute force. The biggest reason why Zhang Ruoxi had been defeated by Mo was that her personal guard could not withstand the intensity and ferocity of the battle. Transferring the core position to her personal guard was a huge burden on their bodies. Each time they became the core, they would also suffer heavy damage from the pressure, hence, there was a risk of their bodies collapsing after numerous transfers. The same was also true for Yang Kai. In fact, the burden was greatest on his main body. The main body had already been greatly weakened after performing the shadow technique. With the addition of the pressure from being the core of the formation, he couldn't help vigorously coughing up blood, his complexion turning as pale as a sheet. Be that as it may, he did not hesitate in the slightest. Taking full advantage of the opening created by the 8 shadows who were besieging Mo, Yang Kai stepped forward and approached Mo's arm that had been severed earlier. Although the arm was bleeding profusely, it was not a fully physical body part. Open. Yang Kai raised his arm and pointed at the arm. His divine sense surged turbulently. A moment later, a huge set of doors suddenly appeared in front of him. The door opened slightly to reveal a small gap, and then an indescribable pulling force seeped out from within and devoured the entire severed arm. This arm contained part of Mo's source. Previously, some 30% of Mo's source had been suppressed and sealed by Yang Kai with the help of the profound source gate. If Yang Kai could not suppress and seal this piece of Mo's source quickly, the opportunity to retrieve his severed arm and reabsorb the piece of his source he had lost would remain. Once Mo did so, he would return to full strength again. Now that this piece of his source had been sealed, Mo's aura dropped significantly. Although black ink strength surged at the spot where his arm had been severed and formed a new limb in the blink of an eye, the power that had been suppressed and sealed could no longer return. With the success of this attack, Yang Kai's confidence increased tremendously. This was the first crucial step towards victory. It was also the hardest and most dangerous step in the entire process. This step had paved the way for the rest of the path, making what came next easier. Retrieving the profound source gate, Yang Kai turned around and charged towards Mo. The furious battle resumed once more. The secret that the position as core of the Nine Palaces formation could be freely transferred between the shadows had already been exposed, therefore, Yang Kai had no reason to hide his movements anymore. Dao's strengths fluctuated violently around him, and his offensive grew increasingly vicious. Mo was already no match for Yang Kai when the Nine Palaces formation was formed, so now that he had lost a part of his source, his situation worsened even more. After a brief but intense battle, one of Yang Kai's shadows found an opening and chopped off one of Mo's arms again. Mo immediately attempted to retrieve his severed arm, but Yang Kai was already prepared for such an opportunity in advance. In the end, Mo was incapable of extricating himself from the battle due to the constant assault by the various shadows. Yang Kai's main body swiftly approached the severed arm, and for the second time, he summoned the profound source gate and devoured the source piece. After completing his task, Yang Kai coughed up another mouthful of blood. He raised his head and glanced at the battlefield. Perceiving the condition of his shadows, he knew that he could not persist for much longer. His main body was not the only one who was severely wounded by now, the rest of the shadows were also in a similar condition. However, only a small portion of these wounds were caused by Mo. Most of them had come from carrying the burden of being the Nine Palaces formation core. Yang Kai's immense strength and heritage had allowed him to bear an unimaginable amount of pressure from being the core. That was only possible because it was him. If it were any other Ninth Order master instead, they would not have been able to withstand the pressure after being a core 3 times in such a situation, regardless of their strength. I have to end this as quickly as possible. Yang Kai muttered under his breath, then, he stepped forward and joined the battlefield. In the next moment, his strongest shadow took on the boundless pressure from being the core and unleashed a continuous storm of attacks without care whether his body could withstand the burden or not. Mo clearly faltered under the violent bombardment of the strongest shadow. While Mo was busy stewing in rage, the strongest shadow threw himself forward and disregarded Mo's counterattack to restrain Mo firmly. At such a close distance, he grinned at Mo and revealed a sinister row of fangs. Mo immediately understood Yang Kai's intentions. Roaring furiously, he desperately struggled to escape, however, the attacks that came blasting from all directions rained down on Mo and the shadow the next moment. Even the strongest shadow could not withstand this barrage of attacks, thus, he exploded and disintegrated completely. Likewise, Mo's body was battered from the attack. The left part of his body was gone, revealing the internal organs within his abdomen cavity. Mo staggered backwards weakly, a strange light flashing through his eyes for a moment. Before he could do anything though, another shadow charged towards him. Martial Peak, Chapter 6000, Many Thanks. The strongest shadow had already been shattered, and with that, the Nine Palaces formation had also been reduced to the 8 trigrams formation, which significantly reduced its might. At the same time, Mo's aura was not as strong as before. After 2 pieces of his source were sealed by Yang Kai, his aura had been notably weakened. As the remaining 7 shadows attacked Mo, Yang Kai's main body summoned the profound source gate for a 3rd time, suppressing and sealing another piece of Mo's shattered body. Mo's aura weakened once again. The 8 trigrams formation was now sufficient to deal with the current Mo. A series of fearsome attacks struck back the battle formation, destroying another of Yang Kai's shadows. In exchange, Mo once again suffered heavy injuries. The 8 trigrams formation had been reduced to the 7 stars formation. Previously, Yang Kai's shadows had emerged from the space-time river one after another, joining the battle formation and making it stronger, but the situation had reversed now. As more of these shadows perished, the might of the battle formation also began to weaken. The only benefit was that Mo also weakened. Each time a shadow perished, Mo's body would shatter and Yang Kai's main body would seize the opportunity to suppress and seal another piece of the former source. In the end, all of the shadows disappeared, leaving Yang Kai bleeding all over, staring right across at a miserable and weakened Mo. The current Mo had a large amount of his source suppressed and sealed, which significantly decreased his strength. He was no longer as mighty as before, and even the rich and dense black ink strength lingering around him was now extremely faint, almost invisible. The current Mo had lost more than 90% of his source. In other words, he only had 10% of his peak strength, which was far from prime condition. Right then, several figures flew over and formed a circle, surrounding the battlefield. They were the human race masters who had been watching from afar, as well as the giant spiritual gods Ada and Aer. Previously, it was impossible for them to intervene in the battle. Even the 2 giant spiritual gods were unable to approach, let alone the Ninth Order masters. However, as Mo's strength suffered with the destruction of Yang Kai's shadows again and again, the spectating masters finally had a chance to be useful. Mo had lost. It was simply impossible for him to deal with so many masters with his current strength. Just the 2 giant spiritual gods alone were enough to overpower him now. Nonetheless, Mo was laughing, his voice sounding extremely cheerful. Zhang Ruoxi stood before Yang Kai with the Heaven's Order sword in her hand, vigilantly staring at Mo. Although Mo was in a miserable state right now, no one knew what kind of methods this ancient being still had hidden up his sleeve. As such, they still had to take necessary precautions. Yang Kai. Mo's smile faded as it shouted at Yang Kai, "Let's settle this." Behind Zhang Ruoxi, Yang Kai calmed his roiling vitality and replied, "Good. Sir." Zhang Ruoxi shouted, "Allow me." She still had the strength to launch one last attack and was confident that she could take down Mo with it, so, she naturally wouldn't let Yang Kai take the risk. "No. There's no need." Yang Kai stepped forward and walked past Zhang Ruoxi, staring at the nearby Mo. Even as victory was within his grasp, there was no trace of the pride or arrogance on Yang Kai's face as a victor should have, rather there was only a complicated expression. "None of you is to interfere," Yang Kai gently ordered. The gathered masters furrowed their brows ever so slightly. In the current situation, the best course of action was undoubtedly to attack together and take down Mo in an instant, ending this disaster that had lasted for millions of years once and for all. However, Yang Kai actually told them not to interfere. No one knew what Yang Kai was thinking or up to. However, out of their trust in Yang Kai, everyone still acquiesced to his demand. Be that as it may, they still maintained their encirclement, and focused their auras. If anything happened to Yang Kai, Mo would immediately be attacked from all directions. When dealing with Mo, there was no need to discuss honor or morals. Despite being surrounded on all sides, Mo's expression still remained calm. He simply stared at Yang Kai and shouted, "Come." As soon as he spoke, his figure rushed straight towards Yang Kai, leaving a streak of black light behind him. Simultaneously, Yang Kai also charged towards Mo. The moment the 2 figures collided, everyone's hearts jumped to their throats. However, the next thing that entered their sight left them relieved. Yang Kai's fist had smashed into Mo's chest, while Mo's fist had stopped right before Yang Kai's head. Pooh! Mo spurted a mouthful of black blood as his raised fist limply fell. Standing at arm's length from one another, when their eyes suddenly met, Mo smiled at Yang Kai. "Many thanks." Yang Kai nodded to him, and thought for a moment before adding, I will let you see the world Mu wished for you to see. Despite the jet-black blood flowing from the corners of Mo's mouth, a free and relieved expression appeared on his face after hearing this. Then, that's enough. Yang Kai didn't say anything more and summoned the profound source gate. As the gate cracked open, it swallowed Mo whole. Right afterwards, the door slowly closed itself, sealing the endless darkness behind it. Back then, it was Mu who had rescued Mo from behind this door, and after more than 1,000,000 years, Yang Kai had sent him back through it. This ancient being had lived his life. He did not dare say he didn't have any regrets, but at the very least, his life had certainly been quite an exciting one. Pooh! Yang Kai spurted a mouthful of blood before sitting down cross-legged, taking out a handful of pills from his space ring and stuffing them into his mouth. Everyone immediately rushed to him upon seeing this. Su Yen flew straight behind Yang Kai and sat down, allowing him to lean on her. After a while, Yang Kai's chaotic aura finally started to stabilize. As he opened his eyes, he saw many pairs of eyes gazing at him with worried looks. I won't die, Yang Kai comforted everyone, allowing them to relax. Mi Jingluan finally couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked, "Why did you thank Mo at the last moment?" Although no one heard Yang Kai's words of thanks, they could tell what he was saying by reading Yang Kai's lips. Yang Kai heaved a sigh, explaining, from beginning to end, Mo never went all out. What? Yang Lai was shocked, he didn't go all out. How is that possible? The others also had a look of incredulity on their faces. To their surprise, their battle almost ended in mutual destruction even when Yang Kai had given it everything he had. Did that mean Mo would have obtained the final victory if he had not held back? Yang Kai continued, it's not that Mo didn't use his full strength, but rather that he didn't resort to any of his other tricks. Yang Kai had always been on guard against certain methods. The royal lords had their royal lord secret technique, which could instantly corrupt 8th Order masters. As the Black Ink clan's creator, how could Mo not have similar methods? What's more, such a method when used by Mo would surely be far more profound than what a royal lord could produce. Of course, Yang Kai had the soul-warming lotus protecting his soul, and the world tree clone protecting his small universe, but even so, he could not say with absolute certainty that they would be able to defend against such a move. Tsang once mentioned that a mere clone could not completely negate Mo's Black Ink strength, only the world tree itself would be capable of that. So, when Yang Kai fought with Mo, he had always been on guard. But from beginning to end, Mo had not used that mysterious method. Was it that Mo couldn't? Impossible. He just didn't want to. Even after Yang Kai summoned his 8 shadows, Mo still held a trump card that could have instantly turned the tables. Furthermore, he never needed to fight Yang Kai head-on, he could have just stalled for time, and the 8 shadows from the future spacetimes would slowly have dissipated. Not to mention, there was even a decent chance Mo could have broken away from the 9 Palaces formation's blockade and escaped. At the very least, it was clear Mo had no such intention. From beginning to end, he had fought with Yang Kai head-on. At first glance, it seemed like Mo wanted to kill Yang Kai, no matter the cost, but was that really the case? Therefore, although Mo had been fighting with all his strength against Yang Kai, he had not truly gone all out. Martial Peak, Chapter 6001, Price. This was the reason why Yang Kai thanked Mo in the end. I'm afraid this is the end he wanted. Mu had protected the human race and the universe for countless years, and even after her death, she had left behind many contingencies and hidden hands. Although the world was in ruins and the human race were like ants to Mo, it was still what Mu wanted to protect. Under the premise that the world had someone else strong enough to protect it, Mo was willing to go along with Mu's will. Of course, if Yang Kai didn't have the necessary strength, Mo wouldn't mind killing him. In that case, Mo would have still set aside a great territory for the human race to live and multiply after he dominated the entire universe. This way, the human race wouldn't be wiped out and he would have a reasonable explanation for Mu. At the end of the day, Mo was not inherently evil. In the late ancient era, he had even protected the human race and took it upon himself to help them gain their freedom. If it weren't for him and the 10 martial ancestors working together, the human race of that era would not have been able to defeat the early ancient era's great monsters. It was just that he was unable to control his gradually growing power and eventually lost his way, especially after Mu's demise. When she died, no one was able to restrain him anymore. Today's ending was something Mo himself probably sought from the start. Everyone sunk into silence after listening to Yang Kai's explanation of what truly happened, as what Mu would want others to know. Their current feelings were tough to describe. Mo's life might have been filled with misery, but he was still the one who had brought about the pain and suffering of the human race for millions of years. Had there been no Mo, the human race would have ruled the world unchallenged after defeating the early ancient era's great monsters. There would not have been a war that lasted for so many eons. The Black Ink disaster had caused unimaginable losses to the human race, with countless elites having sacrificed their lives to bring it to an end. As far as the human race was concerned, no matter how miserable Mo's life had been, it was an irrefutable fact that he was the human race's greatest enemy. As the adage goes, the winner is the king, and the loser is the villain. Gotcha. Suddenly, it sounded as if something had cracked. Everyone promptly turned to look at the source, and was immediately shocked. Big brother. Yang Shui called out, staring at Yang Kai's face in horror. Everyone also looked serious as a crack appeared on Yang Kai's face. It was not a normal wound, and neither was Yang Kai bleeding from it. After the first crack, another one appeared soon after, and then another, and another. They were not just on Yang Kai's face, but on his hands as well. The current Yang Kai looked like a piece of porcelain that was on the verge of shattering, and everyone could feel fearsome Dao strength seeping from these cracks. Yang Kai looked down at his hands and muttered to himself, "It came faster than I expected." He seemed to have anticipated his current situation. "What's happening?" Su Yan asked from behind him, her tender body uncontrollably trembling. After so many years of struggle, Mo was finally defeated and the Black Ink disaster was resolved. The future belonged to the human race, and it was foreseeable that the world would become a far better place. Yang Kai was the biggest contributor in the final battle, but at this moment, his entire body was shrouded in an inexplicable crisis. Everyone could not help but be nervous. What was even more disturbing was that no one had ever seen such injuries before. Yang Kai gently patted the back of Su Yan's hand, comforting her, "I won't die, but I don't have much time left." "What does that mean?" Xiao Xiao asked. How should I put it? Everyone around him was worried to death, but Yang Kai, the main person involved, remained completely calm and composed. The shadow technique was created by Mu with the space-time river as its foundation. I inherited her legacy and walked the same path as her, so naturally I can also use this secret technique. However, Mu's space-time river was incomplete, so her shadow technique was actually incomplete. She could only summon shadows from the past, and once those shadows dispersed, the memories of that period would also disappear. On the other hand, I have perfected this secret technique and can summon shadows from the future. Each shadow I summoned in the battle just now was from 1,000 years in my future. Now that the shadows have already been destroyed, I must pay the price. The more powerful a secret technique was, the harder it was to use it. The shadow technique was undoubtedly the most powerful secret technique that had ever appeared in this world, especially since Yang Kai had surpassed his predecessor and used it to defeat Mo. The price he had to pay would definitely not be small either. Once the shadows of the past are destroyed, the memories of the corresponding past will also disappear. So, what kind of price do you have to pay when your future shadow is destroyed? Mi Jingluan asked solemnly. I won't exist in those periods in the future. You won't exist? What do you mean? Although I can't explain it clearly, you can think of it as a literal statement. Mi Jingluan was silent for a moment, digesting this unbelievable news. You summoned 8 shadows, so does that mean 8,000 years of your future just disappeared? Indeed. What happens after 8,000 years? Yang Kai shook his head. I have no idea. After all, this was the first time he had used the shadow technique, so although he knew that he would cease to exist for the next 8,000 years, all traces of his existence would be erased by the space-time Tao strength of the universe, he couldn't say for certain what would happen after that. How could this be? Yang Shui's eyes turned red. It's not a big problem, I should be able to return after 8,000 years, Yang Kai comforted. Despite his assurance, everyone could hear the uncertainty in his voice. His back suddenly became lighter as Su Yan suddenly left. She returned soon after, but this time she brought Yu Rumeng and the others with her. The eyes of all the women turned red as they tried to hold back their grief, preventing their tears from rolling down. Su Yan had already briefed everyone of the situation, so they knew the crisis Yang Kai was about to encounter. In the short time Su Yan was not there though, further cracks had appeared on Yang Kai and the leakage of Tao strengths had become more and more obvious. Yang Kai really didn't have much time left, and the backlash from the shadow technique was even stronger than he had imagined. Mi Jingluan shot a glance at the crowd, whereupon everyone apart from Yang Kai's close relatives retreated to the side. The women who had been brought here by Su Yan finally couldn't hold it in any further and burst into tears. In the end, it was Yu Rumeng who acted like the big sister of the family and managed to compose herself first. Before she could say anything more though, the skin on Yang Kai's face began to peel off and disappear. Even though they were all 8th and 9th order masters now, there was nothing they could do. Everyone held back their grief as they helplessly watched Yang Kai's figure gradually vanish. At the very last moment, Yu Rumeng shouted at Yang Kai, "You heartless bastard. Mark my words, if you don't come back after 8,000 years, I'll take my sisters and marry someone else." Yang Kai gave her a smile. This sounds so familiar. Yu Rumeng's will finally shattered, and she broke into tears. She tightly grabbed Yang Kai's hand, and begged, "You must come back. You must." Yang Kai swept his gaze over all of them one by one, as if he wanted to imprint their faces into the depths of his soul, before gently nodding and assuring, "Of course." Right then, scattered specks of light emerged before an enormous river spanning across the void appeared, enveloping Yang Kai. Soon after, an enormous wave came crashing down on him, swallowing him into the river. The river slowly disappeared, and so did Yang Kai along with it, leaving behind a group of women standing there in a daze, their endless sorrow flowing like a river. "Something's not right," Mi Jingluan, who was watching from afar, suddenly whispered before turning to Xiang Shan, "Do you feel it?" Xiang Shan nodded his agreement, "There's something wrong." The other 9th order masters more or less felt the same way. Although they couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong, 9th order masters were extremely perceptive. Their senses were so sharp that even just a slight disparity around them would arouse their suspicion. Everyone made their respective probes, but none of them were able to find anything amiss. Unable to find anything wrong, they had no choice but to put this matter aside, but they still maintained a certain degree of vigilance. The curtain of the final battle had already fallen. The Allied army had finished off the Black Ink clan army, while Mo had been completely sealed by Yang Kai. Although the greatest contributor had suffered severe backlash from his secret technique and had his existence wiped out by space and time for the next 8,000 years, when all was said and done, the victory needed to be publicized. When Mi Jingluan and the others returned and spread the news that Mo had been ended, the human race army of millions that had been waiting here all cheered and danced in joy. The war that had been going on for millions of years had finally come to an end. Now, all under the heavens belonged to the human race. After the battle, the casualties were counted and the aftermath was dealt with in an orderly manner. The small stone race army had already withdrawn and returned to the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The human race also began their withdrawal half a month later. The void corridor created by Zhang Ruoshi saved the human race a lot of time. Not everyone left however. Headed by Su Yan and Yu Rumeng, Yang Kai's wives, his disciples, Yang Shui, Yang Shao, and several others all stayed behind. They remained in the place where Yang Kai had disappeared, quietly waiting for his return. The next 8,000 years would definitely be very dull and long, but so long as they could see Yang Kai the moment he returned, any amount of waiting would be worth it. A fleet of dilapidated warships entered the chaotic dead territory through the void corridor. The current Zhang Ruoshi could still somehow maintain the balance of yin and yang in her body, so the chaotic dead territory was now a safe place. Be that as it may, she couldn't maintain this state for much longer. In order to fight Mo and kill the royal lords, she had burned too much of her Heaven's Order bloodline. Once the human race army left the chaotic dead territory, she would break the harmony with the two. At that time, Big Brother Huang and Big Sister Lan would reappear, and Zhang Ruoshi would lose her previous strength. At the end of the day, if she didn't have her Heaven's Order bloodline that could maintain the harmony of yin and yang, she would just be a Ninth Order master. The fleet passed through the chaotic dead territory and soon returned to the 3,000 worlds. Many years ago, when the human race army first set off from the star boundary, they had some 30 million soldiers, but now, only slightly more than 10 million remained. Around 60% of the soldiers had died in this final war. Despite the terrible losses, compared to the solemn and miserable atmosphere they had when they first set out, everyone was high in spirits, and every warship was buzzing with cheers and laughter, despite the sad state of the army. On a certain purifying black ink warship that was so wrecked that it looked like it would fall apart at any moment, Mi Jingluan was standing at the bow with Xiang Shan beside him. The two calmly listened to the hustle and bustle on the other warships and exchanged a knowing glance. The human race has won, but the greatest contributor is unable to celebrate with us. It's quite regretful, Mi Jingluan couldn't help but lament. Xiang Shan nodded his agreement. Now that I think about it, had he not forced those peace treaties with the Black Ink clan, the human race wouldn't have been able to accumulate enough strength. That's right, Mi Jingluan nodded. By the looks of it, that treaty was an important turning point in the rise of the human race. What was that treaty called? What's it called again? The two Ninth Order masters glanced at each other before the smiles on their faces slowly faded away, gradually replaced by solemn looks. Marshall Peak, Chapter 6002, Response. While the millions of human race soldiers were making the trek back home, all the Ninth Order masters gathered aboard the only intact purifying black ink warship remaining. Compared to their peak, the number of Ninth Order masters had undoubtedly decreased significantly, with many of the recently advanced Ninth Order masters having perished in the battle. Only 20 or so had managed to survive. Apart from the Ninth Order masters, Fu Guang was also invited. Everyone took their seats. Most of them were still injured, their auras weak and unstable. The battle ended not that long ago, and even with the recuperative abilities of Ninth Order masters, it was impossible for them to fully recover in such a short time, especially since the human race was running low on supplies, especially recovery pills. One by one, the Ninth Order masters noticed the heavy air. They might not have an idea as to why Supreme Commander Mi had gathered all of them together, but they could tell that bad news was in store for them from his expression. After the last Ninth Order master took their seat, Mi Jingluan finally started addressing the crowd. I've summoned you here today to confirm something. He looked around, paused for a moment, then recounted his conversation with Xiang Shan. When the Ninth Order masters heard this, some were confused, some were lost in thought, and a few who realized the issue right away furrowed their brow. Yang Lai casually asked, "What's there to fret about with your conversation with Big Head Xiang?" He did not find anything wrong, it sounded just a normal chat to him. There's a big problem. Mi Jingluan stared at him with a solemn expression, causing Yang Lai to realize the gravity of the situation, despite not understanding what was the problem. Xiang Shan explained, the peace treaty we signed with the Black Ink clan back then was of paramount importance and could be said to be the turning point in the entire war. It is impossible for Brother Mi and I to forget the details of such an important matter. It would have been nothing if it was just one of us having a hard time recalling certain trivial points of the treaty, but the problem is that neither of us can remember them. When we were discussing the treaty, both of us were unable to immediately recall even some of the basic details of the agreement. That should be absolutely impossible. Yang Lai speculated, frowning, maybe you're too tired from the battle. Xiang Shan focused his gaze on him. Do you remember the first time you met Yang Kai? Of course I remember, Yang Lai replied readily, how could I forget such a thing? At that time, he slowly stopped talking. Obviously, he too had noticed the problem as his expression changed and a furrow appeared on his brow. Xiang Shan then turned to the other Ninth Order masters and asked, everyone, why don't you try recalling your encounters with Yang Kai, or some common knowledge about him? The Ninth Order masters complied. Soon, a bewildered look took over everyone's face. Observing everyone's expressions, Yang Lai immediately understood that they too had encountered the same situation as him. He could not help but mumble, how is this possible? When Xiang Shan asked him to, Yang Lai attempted to recall the first time he met Yang Kai, but he actually couldn't immediately remember it. It was as if his memory was blocked by an invisible barrier. It was right on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't enunciate it for some reason. After struggling for a few breaths, he finally remembered that the first time he met Yang Kai was outside Great Evolution Pass. At that time, Yang Lai was on a scouting mission with his disciples, and Yang Kai arrived to meet him under Xiang Shan's orders. At that time, Yang Kai was only a Seventh Order master. Mi Jingluan's voice sounded in everyone's ears, it's not just you. After Brother Xiang and I discovered this problem, we ordered our men to ask the soldiers the same questions, and they too encountered the same situation. Regardless of whether they personally met with Yang Kai or simply heard stories about him, they were unable to immediately recall the details. What caused this phenomenon? Wu Qing asked in a low voice. He had just tried to recall things about Yang Kai, and it was indeed as Mi Jingluan had described. I don't know the exact reason, but I'm certain it has something to do with his shadow technique, Mi Jingluan continued. Everyone should remember that Yang Kai said that the 8 shadows were summoned from the next 8,000 years. He also said that because those 8 shadows were destroyed, it meant that he would not exist for the next 8,000 years. Everyone nodded in acknowledgement as all of them were present when Mi Jingluan and Yang Kai were discussing this. Yang Kai said that it was the price he paid to use the shadow technique, but now it seems that Yang Kai himself had underestimated the severity of this price. He thought that the price he had to pay would be to disappear for the next 8,000 years, but in reality, some kind of invisible force is slowly erasing all traces of his existence from this world. So, anything related to him would slowly become blurred in the memories of others. Is such a thing really possible? Yang Lai found it hard to believe the most direct way one would think that removing the traces of a person's existence in this world meant was to kill that person, but the elimination that everyone encountered now was no longer as simple as just killing Yang Kai, even their memories of him were being lost. Mi Jingluan added, before Yang Kai used the shadow technique, even I hadn't expected for such a bizarre secret technique to exist. Yang Lai immediately fell silent. The mysteries of the shadow technique were beyond their comprehension, so the price for using it was also unfathomable. As such, no matter how unbelievable Mi Jingluan's speculations were, there was indeed a possibility they were true. This is just the beginning. What I'm worried about is we might even forget everything about Yang Kai with time. All of the Ninth Order masters were shocked. As the greatest hero who led the human race to victory and defeated Mo, Yang Kai should be remembered for all generations, but if the human race were to completely forget about him, that would truly be a tragic misfortune. What will happen if we completely forget about Yang Kai? Mi Jingluan asked. No one could answer. He didn't ask any more, and instead postulated, before disappearing, Yang Kai said that he would return after 8,000 years, but even he did not sound certain of that. So, he might be able to return, or he might completely disappear. Right now, the traces of his existence are slowly being erased, which is akin to him disappearing. If one day everyone completely forgets about him, perhaps he might never appear again. Fu Guang, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. Supreme Commander Mi, do you mean to say that if many people in this world remember him and his fame remains widespread, perhaps it can help him return? Mi Jingluan shook his head. I'm not sure, but it is possible. Then, it's worth a shot. Fu Guang nodded. However, the most important thing right now is to investigate the speed at which his traces are being erased. Only by confirming this matter can we make appropriate arrangements. Agreed. Agreed. We'll do as Supreme Commander Mi says. After many days of investigation by Ninth Order Masters and questioning thousands of randomly selected soldiers, everyone reached an unfortunate conclusion. The speed at which Yang Kai's traces were being erased was increasing, more and more things related to Yang Kai were being forgotten. At this rate, everything related to Yang Kai would be completely gone in short order. By then, no one in this world would remember that there was once a hero who had saved the entire human race. Mi Jingluan couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He immediately sent people back to the original location of the primordial heaven source Grand Restriction to inform Su Yan and the others who were staying there. Although Su Yan and the others would most likely notice this on their own, it was always better to be prepared. An advance team had already been sent back to relay the news of their victory to the human race forces in the rear, so a joyful mood was already spreading. When the army returned, they were naturally received with warmth and celebration. The human race army had suffered heavy casualties in this battle, losing more than 60% of its soldiers. Be that as it may, it was all worth it, as in the future, the world would no longer face the threat of black ink strength. But contrary to the expectations of everyone who had remained behind, the Crusade force showed no signs of celebrating after their return. Instead, they quickly dispersed as if there was a new mission waiting for them. Soon, great statues were erected in the star boundary, myriad monsters world, and everywhere else the human race lived, whether it was a village, a town, or a city. The statue depicted a brave and heroic man wielding a long spear that seemed to have a dragon coiling around it. This man seemed to be staring down an invisible enemy, confronting them in battle. At the base of the statue was Yang Kai's name. Meanwhile, Mi Jingluan entered High Heaven Palace, and with the cooperation of Hua Qingxi and Xia Ningchang, gathered all the people who had close relationships with Yang Kai. Afterwards, under Mi Jingluan's supervision, they jointly wrote a biography. Naturally, it was Yang Kai's biography, and it included all the big and small matters that had happened in his life. There were no excessively embellished accounts in it, just the simple and factual descriptions. Nonetheless, anyone who read this biography would understand how magnificent Yang Kai's life was. Everyone would come to know that in the darkest era of the human race, it was he who tore through the darkness and brought a bright ray of hope to them. They would also come to know that Yang Kai had ultimately paid a huge price to finally defeat the ancient being named Mo and end the war between the two races that had lasted for millions of years. Most importantly, they would know that the world could not forget him, otherwise, he would never be able to return. After this biography was written, countless copies of it were made by High Heaven Palace disciples and distributed to all the places where the human race lived, especially the places where Yang Kai's statue was erected. The Ninth Order Masters even personally placed these jade slips containing Yang Kai's biography into the statues. This way, as long as someone examined the statue, they would be able to immediately perceive the contents of the jade slip and understand Yang Kai's life experiences. Many of the human race's upper echelons were trying their best to prevent the human race from forgetting their greatest hero, Yang Kai. On top of that, the Ninth Order Master once again convened a meeting after the army had returned. Everyone felt that the world was vast and time was difficult to measure, so they decided that the year the Crusade force returned to the star boundary would be designated as the first year of the Void Era. Void was a title, the title of one of the greatest heroes that was slowly being forgotten. As time passed away, new generations of humans were born, matured, and aged. Everyone had already forgotten about Yang Kai, even the Ninth Order masters who had fought alongside him, but the statues that had been erected remained standing tall. Martial Peak, Chapter 6003, 8,000 Years. Void Era, Year 7, 999. The star boundary, where High Heaven Cave Heaven, which was ranked first among the 36 cave heavens, was located, had its ban on entry lifted. Immediately, countless cultivators who were waiting outside the star boundary swarmed in and spread out. The cultivators were entering the star boundary from every possible direction, and were in huge numbers. Although there were all sorts of people among the crowd, no one dared to act rashly on the star boundary. No matter what their temperament was, they had become kind and simple after setting foot onto this universe world. This wasn't just because the star boundary was the domain of the strongest cave heaven, but also because Tao temples of all the other cave heavens and paradises were located here. It could be said that one could find Seventh Order masters casually walking the streets in the star boundary, even Eighth Order masters were as common as dogs. Only the sighting of the legendary Ninth Order masters, who generally remained hidden, would cause some minor sensation. If anyone acted irreverently here, not to mention the sun tomorrow, he or she might not even see the moon tonight. The main reason why the star boundary was so lively was because the Void Festival that was celebrated once every millennia would be held here. Many of the younger generation didn't know the origins of this festival, only that a ceremony was held at the turn of every millennium of the Void Era, and it had been celebrated 7 times already. And if the one that was about to be held was also counted, this would be the 8th. Rumor had it that 8,000 years ago, the living environment of the human race was extremely harsh. At that time, there was a species called the Black Ink Clan that nearly wiped out the human race and conquered the known universe. Back then, the human race was truly on the verge of extinction. However, thanks to its many great heroes and brave soldiers, the human race slowly regained their footing. In the end, the entire human race launched a grand crusade and completely eradicated the Black Ink Clan. From then on, the human race became the true rulers of this world. As for the Void Festival, it was held to commemorate all the humans who gave their lives in the war against the Black Ink Clan. It could be considered the biggest event in the entire human race. The festival would be celebrated for an entire year, during which anyone could freely enter the star boundary. It had to be known that as the territory of the strongest cave heaven, it was normally forbidden for outsiders to enter. This wasn't because High Heaven Cave Heaven was tyrannical, but because they had no other choice. Since the end of the Great War 8,000 years ago, although the human race had managed to quell the Black Ink disaster that had lasted for millions of years, they had paid an extremely heavy price. Countless masters had died in battle, while the entire 3,000 worlds had been devastated by the Black Ink Clan. The only universe worlds suitable for the survival of the human race were the ones in High Heaven territory and the Myriad Monsters territory. The number of habitable universe worlds had been significantly reduced, and as such, the living environment had also suffered. Cultivation resources were also in short supply. As such, the birth of too many cultivators would inevitably lead to chaos. So, the current cultivators could no longer be as unrestrained as they were before the Black Ink Clan invaded the 3,000 worlds. Everything had to be done in a planned manner. 8,000 years ago, the Ninth Order Masters had jointly held a discussion and reached a consensus, which was that anyone with the aptitude to cultivate would have to report to the cave heavens and paradises, and their cultivation matters would be arranged by one of these top forces. This decision was strictly enforced with the joint efforts of all the human race forces. So, all cultivators of the human race, regardless of their background or cultivation, were duly noted and recorded. This decision made the already special star boundary even more exclusive. The star boundary had a world tree clone, and was the first open heaven realm cradle. The second open heaven realm cradle was the Myriad Monsters world. In the years when the human race was fighting the Black Ink Clan, the 2 open heaven realm cradles, the star boundary and Myriad Monsters world, had given birth to many high-rank open heaven realm masters. It could be said that these two open heaven realm cradles played a huge role in the human race's victory in the final battle. However, after the war ended, because of the limit in habitable areas, it was difficult for the human race to withstand the birth of so many new generation cultivators, which put the star boundary and myriad monster world in an extremely awkward position. After returning from the crusade and realizing this problem, the human race's higher-ups made another decision, which was to withdraw everyone from the star boundary and myriad monster world, especially the large number of ordinary people. These ordinary people could not cultivate, but given their huge numbers, they could give birth to many children, some of which would have the aptitude for cultivation. If restrictions weren't put in place, it wouldn't be long before new generations of cultivators were born, which would inevitably lead to unnecessary unrest. Even the people who remained in the star boundary myriad monsters world were forbidden from having children. If they wanted to have children, they would have to leave these two open heaven realm cradles. Of course, the human race's upper echelons also knew that cutting off all avenues forward was not sustainable, so they left behind a glimmer of hope. That hope lay in the Void Festival that was held every 1,000 years. During this one-year-long grand festival, everyone was allowed to freely enter and exit the star boundary. If one could join one of the Tao temples of the various cave heavens and paradises, they would naturally be qualified to remain in the star boundary to cultivate. It was difficult to calculate how many people had entered the star boundary every time the grand festival started, but the number who could truly worship the various Tao temples was not that high. This led to a strange phenomenon, which was that many pregnant women or young married couples would enter the star boundary during the festival. Those pregnant women would then find a place with excellent world energy and live with their families, nourishing their fetus in peace, so that their unborn babies could enjoy the feedback from the world tree clone. As for those young couples, they were only 2 when they arrived, but when they left, their wives' stomachs would most likely be bulging. Jade Mountain Square, an extremely common market in the star boundary. Because of the decisions made in the past, a large number of humans were relocated away from the star boundary, leaving it quite sparsely populated. Owing to which, places like Jade Mountain Square were usually deserted. In other words, this place was only bustling with humans because the grand festival was approaching and countless people had poured into the star boundary. A young couple was strolling around the market, holding hands. The man was suave and handsome, whereas the woman was as beautiful as a flower. They were a perfect match. The woman's belly happened to be slightly bulging, she was obviously pregnant. At this moment, the husband and wife arrived before a tall statue and looked up. The wife kept reaching out to her husband's hand, who helplessly handed her the food in his hands and grumbled, "I told you not to eat so many sweets, why don't you listen?" His wife didn't even spare him a glance and bit down on the candied fruit in her hand, mumbling, "Who says I am the one who wants to eat it? Clearly it's the child in my stomach who wants to eat." The husband couldn't help but roll his eyes. Every time she brought up the child in her womb, he couldn't do anything about it. "Dear, do you think this Yonkai really exists?" The wife quickly finished a stick of candied fruit and took another stick from her husband's hand. "Why are his statues everywhere?" Wherever they went, wherever a human settlement was present, they always found such statues. Rumor had it that these statues had been standing for nearly 8,000 years and had not been eroded by the passage of time at all. Obviously, they were protected by the power of an expert. "How would I know?" the husband brusquely replied. His wife muttered to herself, "His biographies are everywhere, and it seems that everyone has read it intensively. Moreover, according to his biography, he used some kind of profound spacetime secret technique in order to defeat the ancient enemy, which caused all traces of him to be erased from people's minds, and that he would never be able to return if everyone truly forgot about him. Counting the time, it just so happens that when this festival starts, it will be the time for him to return. Dear, why don't we go take a look?" The husband's face darkened. "Why are you looking for him? He's a hero. We humans can have today thanks to his efforts and sacrifices. It's only right that we pay respect to him. His biography has been passed down for 8,000 years, who knows if it's true or not, I think he must be a wise and mighty man. Crunch, crunch, why are you eating my candied fruit? So sour. It's obviously very sweet. According to his biography, he had many wives. Humph, you finally exposed your wild ambitions. My dear child, your father doesn't want us anymore, our lives are really miserable. No, that's not what I said, don't be ridiculous. Everywhere where the humans were gathered, similar conversations were happening between the young couples. Under the vigorous promotion and maintenance of various major sects, the biography compiled by Mi Jingluan had been widely circulated these past 8,000 years. It could be said that any human older than 10 had read Yang Kai's biography at least once. As far as the later generation was concerned, this biography was just a storybook, allowing them to understand the magnificent life of a man named Yang Kai. As for whether the records in this biography were true or fabricated, no one could confirm. This was something even the ancient cultivators of the cave heavens and paradises were unable to determine, because in their memories, many of the things recorded in the biography had indeed happened, but none of them had the slightest impression of the man named Yang Kai being there. If this was really the backlash of the so-called shadow secret technique, it would be too terrifying. Meanwhile, the Ninth Order Masters had gathered at High Heaven Palace. Compared to the crusade back then, the number of Ninth Order Masters had undoubtedly increased. There were more than 100 Ninth Order Masters. After all those rising stars, who possessed the aptitude to advance to the Ninth Order open heaven realm, had gradually advanced over the last 8,000 years. In the main hall, everyone was talking in small groups. Unless there was something important, the Ninth Order Masters seldom gathered together. The Ninth Order Masters also rarely appeared in public. Only a grand event like the Void Festival could gather all the Ninth Order Masters together. With over 100 Ninth Order Masters, the human race's foundation had reached a peak that it had not seen in over 10,000 years. Whether it was the newly advanced Ninth Order Masters, or the old veterans, all of them had participated in the war against the Black Ink clan. Now that they had gathered together, it was only natural for them to reminisce about the glorious past and as they watched the current generation compete against each other. Yang Lai was especially boisterous as he moved through the crowd. When he started talking about the great battles he had fought in the past, he unceasingly beamed with joy. When he got excited, he even pulled his disciple, Gong Lian over. In the past, when this old master was only an 8th Order Open Heaven Realm Master, when I fought against a pseudo-royal lord alone, that pseudo-royal lord wet his pants in terror. This brat saw it with his own eyes. Hey, tell them. Martial Peak, Chapter 6004, Chanting. Gong Lian, who was still called Brat by Yang Lai, had already reached the Ninth Order. Basically, his cultivation was the same as Yang Lai's, but as there was still a master and disciple relationship between them. Even if he was a Ninth Order Master, he could not go against Yang Lai. So, he could not help but nod his confirmation after hearing this. Honored Master is telling the truth. Yang Lai's laughter became even more carefree. A few of the newly advanced Ninth Order Masters also started laughing, all of them knowing how Yang Lai loved to brag and deciding to just go along with it. All of them had witnessed or experienced the might of a pseudo-royal lord firsthand, and it was definitely not something an 8th Order Master could contend with, unless they formed a battle formation. Be that as it may, back when there weren't many 8th Order Masters, Yang Lai had indeed fought a pseudo-royal lord alone, and it was him who was beaten to the point that he had wet his pants. Even so, fighting a pseudo-royal lord alone was still an incredible feat in itself. At that moment, the noisy hall suddenly fell silent, everyone stopped blowing their own trumpet and raised their eyes, looking directly above. In that direction was a calm and composed, half-white-haired Ninth Order Master with a smile on his lips. He swept his gaze over everyone before addressing them. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been 1,000 years since we last met, but it seems everyone's noble bearing is still the same. There are also a few new faces, very good. Everyone greeted with a bow. "Greetings, Supreme Commander Mi." The person who had arrived was none other than Mi Jingluan. Although the human race's crusade force and the various armies had been disbanded, Mi Jingluan's title of Supreme Commander had remained. In terms of cultivation, Mi Jingluan might not be the strongest Ninth Order master, but in every battle against the Black Ink clan, he had played a far greater role than any other Ninth Order master. There was no battle in which he had not racked his brain hard to map out a strategy for victory, and it was he who had ultimately coordinated and dispatched the various troops. He was a cultivator of the same era as Ouyang Lai, Xiang Shan, and Wei Junyang, but if they were to stand together, Mi Jingluan would definitely look older because he had been under even greater stress and for a longer duration during the thousands of years of war. Above the main hall, Mi Jingluan returned the greeting before continuing, "It's the day of the Void Festival. Counting the time, this is already the 8th celebration, and I'm sure everyone knows what this means." Hearing this, everyone's expressions became solemn. For a long time, there have been gaps in our memories. There appears to be traces of a person's existence in many key memories, but whether it's us or others, none of us can remember this person. I don't know what kind of mood I was in when I oversaw the compilation of this person's biography, but now that I think about it, it was definitely the best decision I've ever made in my life. All the signs indicate that this person should have really existed, and that all the accounts in this person's biography should indeed be true. This person is the greatest contributor to the human race's victory over the Black Ink clan. Unlike the cultivators with low cultivation, although the Ninth Order masters present here had some gaps in their memories, these missing memories could be perfectly filled in by Yang Kai's biography, therefore, they could conclude that Yang Kai really did exist and the records in his biography were not fabricated. The reason they had forgotten about Yang Kai was because of the mysteries of the shadow secret technique. A hero cannot be allowed to be forgotten, otherwise, the current human race does not deserve to live. 8,000 years have already passed, and it is time for him to return. The void ceremony has been conducted precisely for this moment. Everyone, the arrangements we had laid back then should be used, it's time to witness the truth. The world only knew that the Void Festival ceremony was a grand event for the entire human race, but didn't know that it was a hidden hand Mi Jingluan and the other Ninth Order masters had arranged long ago. When they had set up this contingency back then, perhaps they had still not completely forgotten about Yang Kai, but now, they really could not remember anything about him. It didn't matter if they didn't remember though, as long as the plan worked. "Please instruct us, Supreme Commander Mi." The Ninth Order masters cupped their fists. Mi Jingluan lightly smiled, "Then let us see if all of this is just an unrealistic conjecture on our part or if we really have forgotten something." One after another, the Ninth Order masters received their orders and flew out of the hall, quickly disappearing, leaving only one Ninth Order master behind. This was a titled Great Emperor recognized by the Star Boundary and the only surviving Great Emperor who had managed to break through to the Ninth Order. There had been other Ninth Order Great Emperors from the Star Boundary, but they had all fallen during the Crusade. The hall sunk into complete silence as Mi Jingluan and the Great Emperor patiently waited. 10 days later, Mi Jingluan finally opened his eyes and glanced at the Ninth Order Great Emperor. "It's about time." The Ninth Order Great Emperor slightly nodded before slowly closing his eyes and spreading his divine sense. The next instant, he had become one with the entire Star Boundary. Right then, in every settlement across the universe world, Yang Kai's statues, which had stood tall for 8,000 years, suddenly started glowing, attracting the attention of countless people. Soon after, a voice started to reverberate from the statue, chanting something. What the voice was reciting was the contents of Yang Kai's biography. The voice seemed to contain some kind of mysterious power, causing everyone who heard it to involuntarily stop in their tracks and quietly listen. As the chanting continued, an enormous picture scroll seemed to have filled everyone's vision. The picture scroll was impressively portraying the life of a cultivator named Yang Kai and how he gradually grew to become the strongest, eventually leading the human race to defeat their enemies. Not just in the Star Boundary, even in Myriad Monsters territory, on every universe world where the humans lived, the setup in the statues was activated by the Ninth Order Masters. At this moment, that chanting was simultaneously ringing in the ears of trillions of humans. Once, twice, 3 times. Gradually, people began to read along the voice coming from the statue. Almost everyone had read Yang Kai's biography, and many scholars had even memorized it by heart. Only, the biography which in the past was only read to pass time was given heavy importance today. Trillions of humans were chanting the Void Great Emperor's real name. At the same time, in the distant void, on the battlefield where the final battle between Yang Kai and Mo was fought, a few people were gathered together inside a floating palace. There weren't many people, only a dozen or so, but apart from a middle-aged couple, the lowest cultivation of the others was the Eighth Order, and there were actually quite a number of Ninth Order Masters present. Everyone gathered here was Yang Kai's close relative. His parents, his wives, his disciples, Yang Shao, Yang Shui. These people had been waiting here for 8,000 years. Xia Ning Chang had originally stayed behind to guard High Heaven Palace because, despite her high cultivation, she had very little experience in fighting. Moreover, she was an alchemy great grandmaster and was more useful stationed in the rear. However, for the final crusade, even she was roped in. After their triumphant return, once Xia Ning Chang had helped compile Yang Kai's biography with Mi Jingluan, she immediately returned here. Naturally, Mi Jingluan immediately set out to fetch all those close to Yang Kai, bringing Yang Yingfeng and Dong Su Zhu here to meet up with Su Yan and the others to wait for Yang Kai's return. Their wait had now lasted for 8,000 years. Martial Peak, Chapter 6005, Supreme Master. The shadow technique's backlash struck without any notice, and was impossible to guard against. At first, Yang Kai's relatives could still remember him, but gradually, all their memories of him began to fade away, and eventually disappeared. One after another, gaps began to appear in everyone's memories. For a period of time, everyone had even forgotten why they had gathered here until they remembered that they were waiting for a very important person. As for who that person was, none of them had any impression of him. The biography that Xia Ning Chang brought back with her had a great effect. The things recorded in the biography and the remaining memories in their minds perfectly complemented each other. This helped them know that a person named Yang Kai had appeared in their lives, and that person held quite a huge place in their hearts. Not far from their location was a void corridor leading straight to chaotic dead territory. At this moment, a figure walked out from the void corridor. It was none other than Zhang Ruoxi. Ruoxi's cultivation was currently at the peak of the Ninth Order, though the wings on her back had disappeared due to separating from the power of Yin and Yang. Her Heaven's Order bloodline had been almost completely burned out in the final battle, so she was no longer able to maintain the delicate balance between the two opposing powers. So, she had no choice but to return to chaotic dead territory and strip away the power of Yin and Yang. Although the loss of her Heaven's Order bloodline was a significant detriment to her, it didn't have much of an impact on her personal strength. It was just that it would be difficult for her to regain the phenomenal power she had displayed that time in the future. Walking out of the void corridor, and identifying her bearing, Ruoxi quickly arrived at Su Yan and the others' location. Noticing her appearance, everyone looked at her. "It's starting," Ruoxi stated softly. Everyone nodded as a solemn look took over their faces. On the platform in front of the palace, everyone sat down cross-legged and calmly started reciting Yang Kai's name. At first, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Over the past 8,000 years, everyone had done similar things countless times just to remind themselves not to forget that name. However, as time went by, a different feeling slowly began to rise in their hearts. Everyone felt suffocated, as if there was a mountain pressing down on them, one that was becoming heavier and heavier. As this suffocating feeling grew stronger and stronger, the forgotten emotions also began to awaken, and along with them, a painful longing gripped their hearts. No one knew who they were missing, and none of them had a clear picture of them in their heart, but they had this feeling that someone who had left a deep mark in their lives had been forgotten, and that person's name was Yang Kai. In a vivid and colorful mysterious void filled with chaos and distortions, a tall and stalwart man with a sword in his hands let out an angry roar before swinging it down. This sword strike almost cut the space-time river in two, revealing Yang Kai's flickering figure behind it. By the time the water rolled back after the strike, Yang Kai had already arrived before the sword-wielding man. He then raised his hand and pointed a finger towards the opponent, sending a wave of water towards the stalwart figure. The stalwart man's expression instantly changed. Having fought Yang Kai for thousands of years, he naturally understood the might of this seemingly unremarkable wave. This wave contained the might of 10,000 grand daos, so even he didn't dare to let himself get swallowed by it. The stalwart man raised his sword and slashed out, shattering the incoming wave and splashing droplets of water flying in all directions. At the same time, the stalwart man quickly withdrew as if he was avoiding snakes and scorpions. Yang Kai didn't chase after him and simply stood in place. Yang Kai sighed in his heart. When he had used the shadow secret technique to defeat Mo and was corroded by the space-time Tao strength, he basically thought that he would fall into a deep slumber or something similar, but how could he have known he would appear in this mysterious place in the blink of an eye? After arriving here, Yang Kai began exploring and to his astonishment, he discovered he was not alone here. There were actually many other masters. These masters were no weaker than him, with some even being stronger. This revelation left him in total shock, because in the entire world, whether it was his cultivation or his comprehension of his grand daos, no one could hold a candle to him. Even Mo, who had 30% of his source sealed, had been killed by him, so who in this universe could be his opponent? But here, there were many masters here who could exchange blows evenly with Yang Kai. What left him even more speechless was that the people here were all extremely belligerent. It did not matter whether there were any grievances between them or not, once two parties met, a fight broke out at least 90% of the time. Battles seemed to become the prime motivation for the survival of the living beings here. In the beginning, Yang Kai had suffered quite a bit. But his situation gradually improved over time as his injuries healed and his comprehension of the 10,000 grand daos deepened. He also made a friend. That man's name was Chongjio, and he was also very powerful. When Yang Kai was being hunted down after first arriving, the man acted out of righteousness and helped him out. Through his conversation with Chongjio, Yang Kai finally understood that this was a place of exile for all masters who had touched upon the taboo. In other words, everyone who was here had touched upon the secrets of the heavens at one time or another. Yang Kai had summoned shadows from the future, which was a taboo. Although he didn't know what Chongjio had done, he was certain he had done something similar. As such, this place was simply dubbed the Taboo Realm. What's more, anyone who entered this place would be quickly forgotten by the outside world. All memories related to those who entered this place would be erased in short order. In the 3,000 worlds, there were definitely very few living beings who could compare to Yang Kai. Yang Kai then recalled the universe furnace and its process of creating new universe worlds, and immediately understood that the masters here all came from different worlds or even universes, ones far beyond the boundaries of the 3,000 worlds. Each and every one of them had reached the pinnacle of their strength in their own realm and had even touched upon that which should not be touched. Yang Kai had once asked Chongjio how to escape this place, and the latter hid nothing. He knew more things than Yang Kai as he had arrived a bit earlier than him. According to him, it wasn't impossible to escape from this place. In fact, there were two methods to escape from here. However, whether these two methods really worked or not was still open to debate, because there had never been a precedent of anyone leaving this place. The first method was to continue fighting and kill the masters from other worlds. Perhaps if they killed enough of them, they might be able to leave. No one knew who proposed this idea, but it sounded a bit unreliable because there was no basis for it. The second method was much more plausible, and it was to have the people of your universe still remember you and wish for your return. A person will die twice in their lifetime. The first time is when their life ends, and the second time is when the last person who remembers forgets them. As far as we are concerned, we may still be alive here, but the world we used to live in no longer remembers us, so we are dead to that world. If we want to rise from the dead, enough people must remember you for you to break through the restrictions here. These were the exact words of Chongjio, and Yang Kai remembered them very clearly. At that time, Chongjio had been drinking the spirit wine he had taken out from his small universe while saying these words. Although this second method was much more reliable than the first, it was still impractical, because once someone entered this place, his or her respective universe would be affected by the restrictions, wiping every single memory related to him or her in a very short time. Once the memories were wiped out, everything was lost. Even if there were some written records left behind, they would just become dust in history over time. Saying so, Chongjio patted Yang Kai's shoulder. "Little brother, just stay here. Although there's no way out of here, it's still quite lively." It was indeed quite lively. Supreme masters of many worlds were gathered here, fighting non-stop every day. This kind of thing would be rarely seen in the outside world, but here it was a common occurrence. At that time, Yang Kai just responded to Chongjio in one sentence, "I will be able to get out. My world will never forget me." Chongjio looked at him like he was looking at an idiot and threw a sentence, "I'll be waiting for that day." Calculating the time, that day should be arriving soon. While Yang Kai was lost in a daze, the tall and stalwart man had returned at some point, and sent a fearsome sword wave at him, forcing him to dodge. From nearby, Chongjio's playful laughter rang out, "Yang Kai, don't die. If you die, I won't be able to watch the good show." He had already arrived a few days ago as promised, wanting to see if Yang Kai could really leave this place. Although he felt that Yang Kai didn't have much hope, since he made a deal, he naturally had to abide by it. Unexpectedly, someone came to seek revenge on Yang Kai at this point. Although it was called seeking revenge, the truth was that there was no great enmity between them. The sword-wielding man had fought with Yang Kai at least 100 times over the past few thousand years, and neither of them had been able to do anything to the other. But this time, he actually brought a companion, wanting to overwhelm Yang Kai with numbers. But unbeknownst to them, Chongjio happened to be together with Yang Kai. A battle had broken out immediately afterwards. Yang Kai was up against the sword-wielding stalwart man while Chongjio dealt with his companion. At this moment, a towering tree had emerged behind Chongjio. It was gently swaying, glittering and shining as if it was cast from gold. One after another, its leaves whizzed through the void, cutting space apart. Its every move carried endless power. Chongjio's opponent was forced to retreat every time he tried to press forward. After fighting for a while, the master couldn't help size up Chongjio before asking, "The Dao tree lineage?" Chongjio raised his brow, "You've seen it." The master continued, "The Dao tree lineage is famous throughout the heavens, and I had the honor of experiencing it firsthand once before." Saying so, he put away his weapon, "I won't fight anymore." Chongjio smiled slightly, "I was thinking the same." Battles were common occurrences in the taboo realm, but there were many cases where a simple smile and greeting could wipe away all enmity. After all, everyone's strength was about the same, so unless there was some kind of irreconcilable grudge between them, no one was willing to really fight to the death. For example, someone like the sword-wielding stalwart man who repeatedly sought trouble with Yang Kai was actually quite rare. He kept attacking Yang Kai mainly because Yang Kai had only been here for a short time, and the sword-wielding man believed that he was an easy target. Owing to repeated battles, Yang Kai's strength had grown significantly over the past 8,000 years. This wasn't surprising though, as Yang Kai did not get the time to consolidate his foundation and perfect it after swallowing and refining Mu's spacetime river before he was forced to fight Mo to the death. It wasn't until he had entered this place and fought battle after battle that Yang Kai finally digested the benefits he had obtained from Mu's final gift. Furthermore, his small universe's foundation was constantly increasing. If he was allowed to go 8,000 years back in time to deal with Mo, he would definitely not end up as miserable as before. Martial Peak, Chapter 6006, Breakthrough. The masters in the taboo realm came from different universes, so the cultivation systems were naturally different as well. For example, the world where Chongjio came from did not cultivate the open heaven realm method. The denizens of his world had their own way of dividing the realms. Be that as it may, the fundamental principles of cultivation were more or less the same. At Yang Kai's and the others' realm, the prime focus of cultivation was the comprehension and application of the Grand Daos. The shining golden tree behind Chongjio was his Tao, the space-time river was Yang Kai's Tao, and the sword-wielding stalwart man fighting Yang Kai had a Tao of his own. The sword in his hand was precisely his Tao. Yang Kai had never seen a master with such a pure Tao. Yang Kai had seen and fought many masters over the past 8,000 years, but none could compare to the sword-wielding stalwart man in terms of pure offense and aggression. In any battle, the stalwart man was constantly on the attack, essentially disregarding defense entirely. At most, he would dodge a little when necessary. Fighting such a person was incredibly frustrating, and it was extremely difficult to reach a conclusion, as the only way to settle things with any sense of finality was for someone to die. Jian Ba, there is no enmity between us, why must you insist on fighting? After exchanging blows for a while longer, Yang Kai shouted as the waves under him swirled. Jing Ba, who was standing right across from him, hideously grinned, why bring up enmity in this damned place? Since I'm here, one of us will die today, the question is whether it will be you or I. Yang Kai slowly shook his head. He was completely unable to reason with him. If the shadow secret technique could be used, Yang Kai was confident he could defeat Jian Ba, but he had already summoned shadows from 8,000 years of his future when he was fighting with Mo, which ultimately caused him to be trapped here. He was basically unable to use the shadow secret technique. Shadows of the same spacetime could only be summoned once. Helpless, Yang Kai could only use the power of his spacetime river to fight ceaselessly with Jian Ba. However, Yang Kai was feeling uneasy for some unknown reason today. He thought that he was feeling unnerved because the 8,000-year deadline was approaching, but later he realized that wasn't the case. He could not afford to get distracted when fighting someone as powerful as Jian Ba, so, how could he have the spare energy to consider the 8,000-year deadline? What caused him to feel uneasy must be something external. As such, he was slowly losing ground against Jian Ba. Chongjio, who was watching the battle from afar, noticed this unusual situation and couldn't help but furrow his brow. Nonetheless, he too had no idea what was going on with Yang Kai. Furthermore, he was being marked by Jiang Ba's companion. He could not lend Yang Kai a hand, and could only wait and watch. Fearsome Tao strength shockwaves spread into the surroundings as the two men clashed endlessly until at one point, Yang Kai suddenly heard a shout ring in his ear. Yang Kai instantly fell into a trance, but before he could hear it clearly, Jian Ba had already disappeared. Immediately, a sense of crisis gripped his entire body. Yang Kai knew that he was in real trouble. His figure quickly distorted and faded away, but the next moment, Jiang Ba arrived before him and slashed down at his fading figure. A splash of blood spattered into the void while Yang Kai's figure appeared in another direction, promptly covering his abdomen. Apparently, Jiang Ba's sword had cut him, leaving a gaping wound. The indistinct shout once again rang in his ear. Yang Kai shook his head, trying to disperse this strange sound, but to no avail. Just after the first shout, a second shout soon followed, and then a third, a fourth. In just a few breaths, Yang Kai felt countless voices ringing in his head. These countless voices jumbled into an incoherent noise before eventually converging into two words. It was naturally his name. Having wounded Yang Kai, Jian Ba doggedly pursued him, but just as he was about to make his move, a great sense of horror suddenly gripped his heart. The moment this sense of horror emerged, Jian Ba's eyes went wide. It was not terror or fear Jian Ba felt though, but instead extreme excitement. Because ever since his cultivation had reached its peak, no one had been able to give him such a feeling. Even in this taboo realm, where he had encountered countless masters, no one had struck true terror into his heart. But at this moment, against an enemy who had been wounded by him, this long-lost feeling had reappeared. Jianba couldn't help but recall the masters he had faced when he was weak. The sword that had accompanied him all his life began to hum, warning him to retreat. Jianba didn't retreat though. Instead, he swung his sword down, causing the expressions of Chongjiu and the other experts watching from afar to become extremely solemn. Because this attack could be said to be the strongest sword attack they had ever seen. It was Jiangba's all-out strike. Once he executed this attack, his target would definitely die. The sword light filled everyone's vision, blinding them. When the sword light disappeared, Chongjiu and the other master quickly looked up, and what entered their sight made their eyes crack wide open in shock. Much to their surprise, Yang Kai had not blocked that sword strike at all and simply let it fall on his shoulder. It almost severed his arm, but it didn't, as the endless river water happened to be wrapped around Jianba's sword and wrist, preventing him from following through. Although Yang Kai was injured, his expression was extremely strange. He seemed a little confused yet also a little relieved. What caught Chongjiu's attention was the void behind Yang Kai, which looked extremely unusual at the moment. It happened to be continuously distorting, and through this distorted space, a faint distortion of spacetime emerged from some unknown place. The restriction of this place had been broken. When Chongjiu recalled Yang Kai's confident words, his heart began to pound violently. Could it be that the rumors circulating in the taboo realm are true? Did enough people in Yang Kai's universe still remember him? But, how is that possible? Anyone who entered this place would be quickly forgotten. Otherwise, how could the masters who had entered this place be unable to leave even after so many eons? But other than this possibility, Chongjiu could not find a better explanation. Yang Kai. He quickly called out. Yang Kai, who was immersed in this wonderful feeling, raised his head and smiled at him before turning to look at Jianba, who was still standing at arm's length. Under Jianba's stunned gaze, Yang Kai stretched out 2 fingers and grabbed his sword. It turns out that only by breaking the restriction here can one pry into the higher realms of the martial Tao. Saying so, Yang Kai gently raised his fingers, lifting up the long sword that had cut into his shoulder. The corners of Jianba's eyes twitched violently as his instincts were giving off warning bells. At this moment, Yang Kai gave him a very strange feeling, as if he was about to achieve some kind of breakthrough. This feeling left him in a great shock. The masters in the taboo realm had already reached their limits. The reason they were trapped here was because they wanted to break through to higher realms, but in the end, they had touched upon the taboos of the heavens. Today, he had seen both an amazing truth and an incredible secret. Breaking the restriction of this place would allow one to gain insight into the next realm. This was a huge blow to Jianba's mental state. Not to mention him, even Chongjiu, who was watching from afar, and the companion Jianba had invited, felt the same way. Stand down. Yang Kai looked at Jianba and declared. Jianba naturally ignored him, gritting his teeth as he poured all his strength into the long sword and pushed it down without muttering a word, seemingly intent on cutting Yang Kai in 2. The sword in his hand was his Tao. Backing down would be equivalent to abandoning his Tao, so how could he possibly agree? Martial Peak, Chapter 6007, he left. Whether it was High Heaven territory star boundary, or the universe worlds of myriad monsters territory, everywhere where humans had settled, humans were chanting Yang Kai's name non-stop, singing his praises, spreading the name of Void Great Emperor. For the first few days, nothing unusual happened, but as time passed, a strange sound started ringing in everyone's ears, like waves crashing onto the shore. Furthermore, the sound became louder and louder with the continuous actions of the humans. Finally, at a certain moment, a strange phenomenon occurred. Everywhere the humans were gathered, a river suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The sonorous sounds of waves crashing were originating from the river, and everyone witnessed this magical sight. The water in the river swelled and flowed towards the horizon, passing through the endless void, flowing through one great territory after another, to the late ancient era battlefield, and finally converging on the final battlefield where Yang Kai and Mo fought each other. The dozen or so of Yang Kai's close relatives in the palace looked excited at the sight of this. Their chanting became more hurried, and their expressions more fervent. The river was illusory at first, as if it existed in another spacetime, but it soon became real and tangible. Immediately afterwards, a figure emerged from the tumultuous waves in the river. Looking at the figures standing in the palace, the figure cracked a smile and stated, "I'm back." The figures in the palace broke into tears of joy as they swarmed towards the figure one after another. Meanwhile, the masters in the taboo realm soon got the news and rushed over. Over 100 people had gathered in a short time, and more were still coming from afar. These people were all supreme masters of their respective universes. Each and every one of them had reached their own limits. Every single one of them used to be a legendary figure where they came from. But now, their worlds had long forgotten about them, causing them to be trapped in this taboo realm. Over 100 of the strongest masters in existence were calmly standing around the location where Yang Kai had fought with Jiangba, staring at a corpse floating nearby. The corpse naturally belonged to Jianba. Jianba was tightly holding a broken sword in his hand, while the cause of his death was none other than the other half of his sword being rammed through his chest. Dead. There was no shortage of brave and ruthless men in the taboo realm, and battles broke out all the time. These were the kind of battles one would seldom see in the outside world. Be that as it may, very few people actually lost their lives during these fights. Because although the cultivation methods were different for universe to universe, everyone's prime focus would be their Tao, after their cultivation had reached its utmost limit. It could be said that all things lead to the same destination. As a result, everyone's strength was basically the same here. So, no matter how intense a battle was, very few people would die. The last time someone died was over 100,000 years ago, and that was because a certain man with a horrible personality ultimately drew everyone's ire and was besieged by many supreme masters. But the current situation was far from that. It was pretty obvious that Jianba had not died because he was ganged up on. No matter what kind of Tao they were cultivating here, they all had sharp vision and insight. The one who had killed Jianba was just a single man. Furthermore, Jianba's opponent had killed him so easily that he had even snapped Jianba's sword in two. Even if these supreme masters present here weren't very familiar with Jianba, most of them had fought him at least once in the past. Jianba's sword was his Tao. So, killing someone might not be a big deal, but killing someone while destroying their Tao at the same time was inconceivable. What the Supreme Masters were concerned about was that they had sensed some unusual fluctuations a while ago. Even when they were far away, those fluctuations were as bright as a match in the darkness. Those were clearly the fluctuations caused by someone breaking through their current cultivation realm. But by the time they arrived here, they didn't see anything. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the faces of Chongjiu and Jianba's companion were filled with a bitterness, their expressions way worse than eating a bitter pill. Both had witnessed Jianba's death at the hands of Yang Kai, which had shook them to the core. By the time they came back to their senses, the Supreme Masters had already arrived here to investigate after noticing the commotion. As a result, they were unable to leave. If they tried to leave now, they would definitely be forced to stay. The Supreme Masters had been trapped here for far too long, so any unusual movements would definitely attract their attention, let alone a disturbance that exceeded the limits of their current strength. Who was here? Someone suddenly asked. Although it was a random question without a head or tail, the meaning behind it was obvious. The speaker was obviously asking who had witnessed Jianba's death. No one answered. Who arrived here first? Someone asked. Still no answer, but the eyes of the Supreme Masters began to wander across each other, their gazes swiftly changing as they reached a certain unspoken agreement. Finally, everyone's eyes landed on Chongjio. Chongjio scowled in anger as he stared at the colleague invited by Jianba. "Why are you only looking at me? He was here as well." Although the two were originally on different sides, they clearly had no choice but to band together at this moment. If they didn't handle this situation well, they might become the public enemies of all the Supreme Masters, so they couldn't afford to be careless. There was no escape from this taboo realm. If they became public enemies, things would be hard-pressed for them in the future. "Who killed Jianba?" an old man with small stature asked. This old man had been trapped in the taboo realm for who knows how many years. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was one of the oldest Supreme Masters in the taboo realm. At least, these 100 or so Supreme Masters present had all come to the taboo realm later than him. "It wasn't me," Chongjio quickly clarified, "I'm not that capable." The Supreme Master standing beside him also quickly denied, "I didn't kill him either." "You were here first, didn't you see who did it?" the short old man asked. Although he was the only one who spoke, he represented everyone. Well, Chongjio hesitated for a moment. He knew that no matter what, he couldn't avoid this matter. Rather than drawing everyone's ire, he might as well speak the truth. After understanding this point, he finally answered, "Yang Kai killed him." "Who is Yang Kai?" the short old man frowned. He had never heard of this name before. He was a newcomer whose Tao strengths had manifested into a river. He arrived about 8,000 years ago, someone explained. The short old man finally understood. "I seem to have some impression of him, but how could a newcomer kill Jianba? Where is he?" "He left," Chongjio replied. "Where did he go?" "He left, from this place." The Supreme Masters were stunned for a moment before staring at Chongjio in shock. Being the focus of attention of so many Supreme Masters, Chongjio felt as if an enormous mountain was weighing down on him. The Supreme Master who was standing by his side subtly stepped away from him, drawing a clear line between them. "You said, he left this place?" the short old man asked. Although his tone remained calm, his heart was in turmoil. "Brothers, sisters, there's no need to stare at me like that, he really did leave. This friend and I saw it with our own eyes," Chongjio stated as he pointed towards the Supreme Master who had just stepped away from him. The man's face darkened, but he knew he couldn't avoid it. All he could do was brace himself and nodded. "Yes, he did leave." Chongjio smiled and said, "Weren't you all attracted by those strange fluctuations? I'll be frank with you, according to the rumors, there are two ways to leave the taboo realm, and the second method is apparently true. Yang Kai used that method to leave this place. What's more, when he broke through the restrictions here, he seemed to also break through to the next realm, allowing him to kill Jianba. Since ancient times, it had been passed down that there were two ways to escape the taboo realm. One was to constantly fight and kill other Supreme Masters. So long as you killed enough Supreme Masters, you would have a chance to leave this place. The second was to have enough people from your original universe remember you and wish for your return. Whether the first method would work or not, no one knew, because few people ever died in the taboo realm. But now, the second method had been proven effective. If Chongjio wasn't lying, Yang Kai had left the taboo realm using this method. Under these circumstances, there was no need for Chongjio to lie, everyone was well aware of this. How is that possible? Once we arrive here, the denizens of our worlds would have quickly forgotten about us. Without any memories, how can they remember us? This is simply impossible, someone questioned. Chongjio spread out his hands and stated, "I don't know. In any case, Yang Kai told me a long time ago that his world would never forget him. Perhaps because he saved his universe, the people of that world still remember him." The Supreme Masters still found it difficult to accept this, because from ancient times until now, there had never been a precedent of anyone leaving this place. But now, a newcomer who had only entered 8,000 years ago had done just that. This made them envious, but at the same time, they also saw a glimmer of hope. If someone could leave here, it meant that this taboo realm wasn't a prison they couldn't escape from, it was just that they had not found the right way. It was definitely impossible to count on Yang Kai's methods. Not mentioning who knows how his world still remembered him, the main reason was that he had only been here for 8,000 years. The others had simply been here for far too long. Before Yang Kai, the previous Supreme Master to arrive here had done so some 20,000 years ago. After tens of thousands of years, all traces of his existence in his world would have long since vanished. You can get a glimpse of the next realm after breaking the restrictions here. What kind of realm is that? The short old man asked. Chong Jiu shook his head. I don't know what realm he reached, but once he broke through, he casually snapped Jian Ba's sword with just 2 fingers. All the Supreme Masters gasped in shock. What those 2 fingers destroyed was not just a sword, but Jian Ba's Dao. One could only imagine what amazing realm Yang Kai must have reached at that instant. Everyone, before Yang Kai left, he told me that he will find a way to rescue me. Although I don't know if he would be able to do it, if he does, everyone here will have new hope of finding a way out. Chong Jiu threw out another piece of news that excited everyone. In an instant, the expressions of all the Supreme Masters present changed. Half a day later, the Supreme Masters finally dispersed. Chong Jiu let out a long sigh and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although he was also a Supreme Master and didn't fear any individual in the taboo realm, being stared at by hundreds of masters just as strong as him still felt like being stabbed multiple times. If he hadn't thrown those words at the last moment, Chong Jiu believed that these guys would have attacked him together and then interrogated him for more information. Even if he had already divulged everything he knew. However, everything was different once he spoke those last words. As long as they still wished to leave the taboo realm, they would not make things difficult for him in the future. In fact, if anyone dared to make things difficult for him, they would become public enemies of this taboo realm. Marshall Peak, Chapter 6008, World Creation. An enormous river stretched across the void, its waters fiercely surging, with waves rising and falling one after another. Yang Kai was sitting in a cross-legged position over this enormous river, forming a set of profound hand seals. As his hands moved, the water in the river would cycle through states of agitation and calm. The myriad of Dao strengths would also undulate with the current in the river. It had been several years since Yang Kai returned from the taboo realm. Whenever he recalled his absurd experiences over the past few years, Yang Kai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. On the day, when he finally returned from the taboo realm, all his relatives came to meet him tearfully, complaining about their pain of parting. Soon after, everyone returned to the star boundary together, and after learning of the news of his return, all rejoiced. In the 8,000 years after Yang Kai's disappearance, all their memories about him had been erased, but the moment he returned, all the vanished memories were restored. No one knew what extraordinary power could cause something like this. Only Yang Kai seemed to notice something. After that, Yang Kai was placed under house arrest. He, a mighty expert who had surpassed the open heaven realm, who had reached an unprecedented realm never seen before, who could call the wind and rain with just the flip of his hand, had actually been placed under house arrest. The ones who put him under house arrest were none other than Yang Yingfeng and Dong Suzhu. His wives were also under house arrest like him. According to his parents, they were growing old. It was already a miracle that they had been able to give birth to Yang Shui in the past, but there was no way for them to have any more children. So, the responsibility of continuing the Yang family's bloodline fell squarely on Yang Kai's shoulders. The old couple didn't make any outrageous demands, just that he should father as many children as the number of wives he had. So, each of his wives should give birth to at least one child. When this condition had been fulfilled, they would release them. In terms of strength, his parents were naturally not Yang Kai's opponents and he could easily escape if he really wanted to. However, his parents had also said that if their unfilial son dared to disobey them this time, they would bash their heads against High Heaven Peak until they died. Yang Kai was left with no choice. According to his parents, Yang Kai had been cultivating for many years and had explored many worlds, big and small. He had been constantly on the move. But now that the world was at peace and his cultivation had already reached the limit, there was nothing he needed to worry about in this world. As such, he should pay attention to continuing the Yang family's bloodline. Helpless, Yang Kai, Su Yan, Yu Rumeng, and the others were locked up on a lone peak in High Heaven Palace. It wasn't until several years later that Yang Kai walked out of the mountain peak with a tired look on his face, his eyes sunken and his face pale. Right behind him was a large group of beautiful women with big bellies. Yang Yingfeng and Dong Su Zhu were overjoyed. As the saying went, people need to be pushed to get results. In the past, they had tried to make Yang Kai continue their bloodline, but he had always brushed them off with all kinds of excuses. If they had known it would be this simple, they would have put him under house arrest long ago. After having completed this vital mission, Yang Kai finally had time to catch up with his old friends. Mi Jingluan and the others were naturally aware of what was going on with Yang Kai over these past few years, so, they could not help but tease him when they finally met up. Soon, Yang Kai learned about the current situation of the human race from the other Ninth Order masters. With the end of the war more than 8,000 years ago, the Black Ink clan was completely wiped out, and the universe had finally achieved a state of peace. Now, the human race were the sole rulers of the world. Be that as it may, the scars of countless years of war were difficult to erase. The 3,000 worlds used to be extremely prosperous, but now, apart from those in High Heaven territory and Myriad Monsters territory, the universe worlds and the rest of great territories had either been completely corrupted by Black Ink strength or had long since been destroyed. It could be said that the habitable space for the human race had been greatly reduced. Originally, traces of human activity could be seen in every great territory, but now, all the surviving humans were gathered in High Heaven territory and Myriad Monsters territory, with more than 90% of them living in the latter. In fact, because of the scarcity of cultivation resources, the two open heaven realm cradles, the star boundary and Myriad Monsters world, had essentially been evacuated and cordoned off. The human race didn't dare let too many people live in these two open heaven realm cradles, lest too many good seedlings were born and there were no resources to nurture them. If the number of people suitable for cultivation increased, but there were no resources for them to cultivate with, fights over cultivation resources would definitely break out, which would ultimately lead to chaos. Currently, the population living on the star boundary Myriad Monsters world was extremely small, and if one wanted to enter these two open heaven realm cradles, they would need to undergo a rigorous series of tests and selections. This was the current state of the human race. They had won the war, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Nonetheless, they could not do anything about it. The Black Ink clan had simply done too much damage to the 3,000 worlds. In addition, the human race didn't have the means to repair these corrupted universe worlds. If no solution was found, the human race would have many dark days ahead of them. Fortunately, Yang Kai had returned from the taboo realm, and at this moment, he was repairing a universe world. This was an uninhabited great territory. Perhaps this great territory once used to be bustling with human activity, with its universe worlds being rich and prosperous. However, after the Black Ink clan occupation, all that was left was deathly silence, and all the universe worlds had died. The massive space-time river stretched across the void, with universe worlds floating up and down in the river, Dao strengths fluctuating rhythmically. The Black Ink strength that had corrupted these universe worlds was quickly stripped away and then sent into the profound source gate by Yang Kai to be sealed. After that, Yang Kai evolved Yin and Yang, then harmonized the 5 elements, which gave birth to the 10,000 grand Daos. The flow of time in the space-time river was different from the outside world, and with Yang Kai's current cultivation, this flow rate had reached an extremely exaggerated degree. Perhaps 1,000 years were elapsing inside the river for each breath that passed in the outside world. The lifeless universe world slowly regained its vitality in the spacetime river. Suddenly, a small figure stepped out and walked over to Yang Kai's side before pursing his lips in frustration. "It's empty outside, there's nothing here, so boring." Yang Kai fiercely turned to him and shot him a glare. "It's all your fault." The figure immediately tried to explain, "What does Mo's evil deeds have to do with this little 11? The small figure standing next to Yang Kai at this moment was none other than Little 11, or rather, it was the same person Yang Kai had seen in the primordial world's Dawn City. 8,000 years ago, Yang Kai defeated Mo and sealed it with the profound Source Gate. However, as the most ancient being in this universe, even Yang Kai was unable to completely destroy Mo. After all, Black Ink's strength was a power born at the beginning of the universe. As long as the universe still existed, and as long as there was darkness in living beings, Black Ink's strength would never be extinguished. However, Yang Kai spent some effort to extract the consciousness born from this power from the profound Source Gate. This consciousness was Little 11, who was standing beside him. Strictly speaking, Mo was Little 11, but these two were different. In other words, Little 11 was not making excuses, he was indeed not Mo. During the early ancient era, he had fought alongside the 10 martial ancestors to protect the human race. Only Mu had noticed the problem in Mo at the time. She had set up the primordial heaven's source grand restriction and sealed Mo before its consciousness was completely corrupted. Afterwards, under Mu's secret arrangements, Mo's source was divided into 3,000 pieces and sealed in different universe worlds while Mu kept Mo's consciousness by her side to guard him. Unlike what Mu did, the current Little 11 was not some weak child in Dawn City who did not even have the strength to strangle a chicken, otherwise, he would not have been able to wander the void alone. Looking at the surging river stretching across the void before him, Little 11 couldn't help wondering, "Speaking of which, what realm are you in now?" Little 11 was completely unaware of the fact that Yang Kai was trapped in the taboo realm, as Mo was sealed by Yang Kai after his defeat, and Little 11 was freed just a few days ago. However, Little 11 was surprised to discover that Yang Kai's strength was far greater than the last time Mo fought with him. It seemed to have gone beyond the scope of the open heaven realm. Little 11 reckoned that even if Mo had been at his peak, he would still be no match for the current Yang Kai. "You're supposed to be a master in the creation realm, can't you see through my cultivation?" Yang Kai asked instead of answering. Little 11 explained, shaking his head, "That's a false claim. Mo never reached the creation realm. He could at most be described as a pseudo-creation realm master. The main reason Mo was able to create the Black Ink clan is because of the unique properties of Black Ink's strength, not because Mo had reached the necessary realm, but you're different. Your current cultivation has indeed exceeded the open heaven realm, so I'm very curious about what realm you've reached." Yang Kai had already noticed that there was something wrong with Mo's creation realm a long time ago, but at that time, his strength and vision were simply insufficient, as such, he was unable to determine anything. Now that Little 11 had personally admitted it, Yang Kai wasn't too surprised. "My realm," Yang Kai muttered before shaking his head, "no one has reached this realm before, so I don't know what it should be called." Saying so, he quickly changed his hand seals before raising them towards the spacetime river, making a grabbing motion. The next moment, the enormous river was gripped by Yang Kai, who gently shook it and shouted, "Go!" Immediately after, tiny grains of sand were flung out from the spacetime river one after another and began rapidly expanding. Surprisingly, these grains were universe worlds. These universe worlds were the remaining universe worlds of this great territory. Originally, they had been corrupted by Black Ink strength and were devoid of any life. Some were even destroyed by the Black Ink clan's resource exploitation. But now, all these universe worlds had completely changed. Although there were no sentient beings on them, each of these universe worlds looked completely new, without a trace of Black Ink strength left on them. The dilapidated universe worlds had been repaired and were filled with perfect grand chaos. Furthermore, each of these universe worlds was lush and green, full of life and vigor. These universe worlds were already teeming with vitality, so they would give birth to their first life forms in just a few years. Even with little Eleven's vast experience, he was still shocked by this amazing sight. The universe worlds were not artifacts, nor were they pieces of furniture, they were not something that could be repaired so easily. However, these devastated universe worlds had been brought back to life by Yang Kai. This was not something a normal human could do. Creating something out of nothing, a divine ability to create a new world, truly amazing. Looking at the universe worlds flying out into the void and slowly coming to a stop at certain spots, little 11 couldn't help but sigh with emotion. He felt that his sins had been significantly reduced. Hearing this, Yang Kai raised his brow as a smile flashed on his face, then let's call it the world creation realm. Huh? Little 11 was stunned, but quickly recovered and muttered, the world creation realm, it's quite appropriate. In the past, the universe furnace created all worlds, but now, Yang Kai's space-time river was also able to create universe worlds. The space-time river itself was modeled after the infinite river inside the universe furnace, and the infinite river was the foundation of the entire universe furnace. All the universe worlds in this universe had been created by the infinite river. Yang Kai felt that his own space-time river would reach the level of the infinite river sooner or later. Let's go to the next place. Yang Kai stood up and rushed towards the adjacent great territory, with little 11 following closely behind him. Marshall Peak, Chapter 6009, The Future. Every great territory Yang Kai passed though had its once dead universe worlds now radiating with new vitality. By the time Yang Kai was finished restoring all the great territories in the 3,000 worlds, 1,000 years had already passed. Yang Kai then spent another 1,000 years doing the same thing to the universe worlds in the Black Ink battlefield. After 2,000 years, the entire 3,000 worlds and even the Black Ink battlefield were no longer desolate and barren as they had been in the past. They were once again brimming with endless vitality. In time, these universe worlds would definitely be able to produce new cultivation resources, and the increasing number of humans would slowly become the masters of these universe worlds. Void World was originally Yang Kai's small universe, the crystallization of his life's cultivation, his very foundation, but now, he had stripped away his small universe from himself and turned it into a real universe world, placing it in high heaven territory, next to the star boundary. He did this after he broke through the shackles of the open heaven realm and advanced to the world creation realm. It was quite an incredible feat. Upon learning of this, all the Ninth Order masters were totally shocked, but considering that it was Yang Kai's handiwork, they were able to accept it. After all, he was the only world creation realm master in the history of the human race, so any kind of absurd and impossible feat suddenly became perfectly normal for him. At this moment, somewhere on Void World, Yang Kai looked at a child in front of him and exhorted in a serious manner, I'll leave little 11 in your care. If there are any abnormalities, seal him immediately, I will deal with him when I return. Although the child did not look very old, he spoke in a steady voice like an elder, understood, big brother. This child's appearance bore some resemblance to Fong Tianci. As a matter of fact, he was none other than Fong Tianci. After Yang Kai used the 3-self source reconstitution art to advance to the Ninth Order open heaven realm, Fong Tianci and Thunder Shadow lost their physical bodies, but their consciousnesses remained in Yang Kai's knowledge sea, accompanying him for many years. Because of the uniqueness of the 3-self source reconstitution art, while they were Yang Kai's soul clones, they were also independent entities. Over the years, while Yang Kai was repairing the universe worlds, he had also been thinking about how to bring Fong Tianci and Thunder Shadow back to the world of the living. He couldn't possibly allow them to remain in his knowledge sea forever without a flesh body. Reincarnation was certainly a good choice, but in that case, they would most likely lose their original memories and become another unfamiliar soul. After all, it was not the same as when he had cast his secret technique, and left many seals on his soul clones, ensuring that his soul clones would grow aware of their mission and memories at the right time. Finally, when Yang Kai decided to strip off his small universe, he was struck with an indigenous idea. That was to integrate Void World Source into Fang Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow, allowing them to reincarnate along with the world itself. This way, not only would they be able to retain their original memories, but they would also become the masters of Void World. From then on, they would share the same fate as Void World. If one suffered, all suffered, and if one prospered, all prospered. So long as Void World was not destroyed, they would be immortal. Yang Kai's small universe's foundation was extremely strong, and now that they had become this universe world's masters, it would be easier for them to progress in the future. It was easy to foresee that the 3,000 worlds would have 2 more top masters in the near future. Yang Kai had also left Little 11 here to be watched over by Fang Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow, as it would be grossly inconvenient for him to bring Little 11 along for the rest of his journey. After the child Fang Tian Ci responded, a black kitten sitting on his shoulder also nodded and spoke like a human, meow. Big brother, don't worry, if there's anything wrong with this brat, second brother and I will beat him to death. A look of anguish and frustration appeared on Little 11's face as he rebuked, don't make me sound like some wicked demon, at least show some basic respect to a senior like me. The kitten immediately let out a snort. Then, I'll take my leave, Yang Kai nodded before soaring into the sky. The trio's gazes followed after him until Yang Kai finally disappeared from their sight. A moment later, the child, Fang Tian Ci, and the kitten, Thunder Shadow, stared at Little 11 together, causing him to frown. What do you want? The kitten shouted, let's beat him up, meow. Having said so, his figure left afterimages as he pounced at Little 11's face, while his pair of cat claws swiped furiously, leaving multiple afterimages. Little 11 cried in surprise, and just as he was about to dodge, the child, Fang Tian Ci, threw him on the ground. A moment later, 2 humans and a kitten were lying on the ground with their faces black and blue. Thunder Shadow gasped for breath as he stated, I've wanted to beat you up for a long time now. Satisfying. The child Fang Tian Ci did not fare any better. His nose was bleeding, but there was a content smile on his face. Little 11's face was covered in claw marks. He was undoubtedly much stronger than these 2, but this was Void World, and the child Fang Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow were the masters of this place. Little 11 was just asking for trouble by being hostile to them while within the bounds of this universe world, thus, their fight ultimately ended in both sides being defeated and wounded. Nonetheless, Little 11 stubbornly declared, once I recover, I'll deal with you too. Outside Void World, when Yang Kai arrived in the void, what he saw next took him aback, because there were many familiar faces waiting. Putting aside the group of women led by Su Yan, Yu Ru Meng, and the others, many of the Ninth Order Masters were also here. How did my whereabouts get leaked? Yang Kai secretly reflected for a moment, wondering how he gave himself away. All he could say was that his wives understood him too well. Are you planning on going on a long journey? Old ancestor Xiao Xiao looked at him and asked. Yang Kai nodded his affirmation, I made a promise to someone. I have to at least try to save him. Inside the taboo realm, Chongjiu was not lying when he said to the many supreme masters that Yang Kai vowed to save him. Yang Kai had indeed sent him a divine sense transmission just before he left, declaring as much. Chongjiu had helped Yang Kai quite a bit during his 8,000 years in the taboo realm. Furthermore, the 2 of them shared the same ideals. If possible, Yang Kai wanted to rescue him from the taboo realm, despite the fact that he had no idea where Chongjiu's universe was. This would probably take a lot of time and effort to find, and there was no guarantee his trip would bear any results. Having fallen into the taboo realm, Chongjiu's world had forgotten about him a long time ago. Even if Yang Kai found his home, he might not be able to discover any traces of Chongjiu's existence. However, as the saying goes, put forward your best, and leave the rest to the heavens. I also want to find a way to overcome the shackles of the open heaven realm method. The open heaven realm method that the human race was currently cultivating was comprehended by the 10 martial ancestors from the world tree and passed down through the ages. The open heaven realm method allowed the human race to gain a foothold in this world and gave them a chance to become the overlords of this universe, but in the end, this cultivation method was flawed. All cultivators who ascended to the open heaven realm had innate limits imposed on them. Such a cultivation system was obviously imperfect. In the taboo realm, Yang Kai had come into contact with many supreme masters from different universes. Each of them had a different cultivation method, but very few of their methods had such obvious shackles as the open heaven realm. As the popular adage goes, stones from other hills may be used to polish one's own jade. So, Yang Kai's purpose of venturing out to explore was firstly to find traces of Chongjiu, and secondly, to study the cultivation systems of other places to see if he could make use of them to improve the open heaven realm method. Since the human race was now thriving, and countless universe worlds had been restored, even the originally desolate and dilapidated black ink battlefield had regained its vitality, the humans no longer needed to worry about living space and cultivation resources. Yang Kai felt that it was time to shift his attention to future issues. What's more, there was not just his universe in the vast and endless void. Although he had now reached the world creation realm, no one could say with absolute certainty that there were not any existences stronger than him out there. If one day a master from another universe came to invade, their side must have enough strength to protect themselves. This was also a form of preparation for the rainy days. If you can find such a thing, could we break through to the world creation realm? Xiang Shan asked. Probably not, Yang Kai shook his head. He had experienced breaking through to the world creation realm firsthand, so he knew the method to do so and understood it was not something that could be achieved by solving the shackles of the open heaven method realm. Rather, this breakthrough was more about opportunities, luck, and several other conditions. The ideal situation is to allow the current human race to advance through the open heaven realm without being affected by their innate shackles first. Originally, a cultivator who directly ascended to the third order open heaven realm would have an upper limit of the fifth order, but if Yang Kai found a solution to this flaw, then a third order master would not only be able to reach the sixth order in the future, but he would also be able to cultivate to the limit of what he could achieve, perhaps even reaching the ninth order one day. In that case, the human race, with the help of 2 open heaven realm cradles, would be able to give birth to even more 8th order and 9th order masters. If a 9th order master wanted to break through to the world creation realm, they would first need to study the 10,000 Grand Daos. When his or her mastery of the Grand Daos had reached a certain level, they would finally be able to touch the taboo of this world. Finally, if that person could break the restriction of the taboo realm, they would then advance to the world creation realm. Yang Kai had already traversed this path, so if the 9th order masters took this path again in the future, it would be a bit easier and more relaxed than when he had first ventured onto it. That's not a bad idea, Mi Jingluan nodded his acknowledgement. Then I wish you all the best, but we won't be able to provide much help in this matter. You can only count on yourself. With Yang Kai confirming the existence of the world creation realm, the 9th order masters were all diligently cultivating and studying the mysteries of various Grand Daos. Furthermore, with Yang Kai's current cultivation, they would not be able to provide any support to him even if they accompanied him. Yang Kai nodded before turning to his wives. Yu Ru Meng stated with a snort, "You can forget about leaving us behind this time." Although the other women didn't say anything, their determined expressions were speaking for themselves. Yang Kai smiled, then, "Let's go together." The group of women immediately broke into cheers. They were obviously overjoyed as they had not expected Yang Kai to agree so easily. Immediately, the group of women gathered around Yang Kai, chatting and laughing. "Old tree." Yang Kai suddenly called out to the void, "Let's go." In response to his call, the world tree's illusory phantom appeared in everyone's field of vision. The towering giant tree was no longer lifeless as it used to be, rather, it was lush and brimming with vitality. Not only that, but countless world fruits were also hanging from its branches. In the past, Yang Kai had borrowed the world tree's power to travel to the grand ancient ruins boundary from the edge of the universe. This made the old tree consume too much energy and it fell into deep slumber. Only when Yang Kai returned after reaching the world creation realm and began using his space-time river to repair the universe worlds in the various great territories did the old tree slowly wake from his slumber. The world tree was closely connected to the universe worlds in the 3,000 worlds, everyone's rise and fall was connected with each other. When the Black Ink clan occupied the 3,000 worlds, the world tree was shrouded in a miasma of gray energy for many years, which left it in a desolate state. As the universe worlds died one after another, the fruits hanging on its branches also began to wither and fall. This caused the old tree to shrivel and grow older. It had to be brought to notice that these world fruits were the embodiments of the vitality of the various universe worlds. If the universe worlds were alive, their corresponding fruits were fresh and alive, if the universe worlds died, their corresponding fruits withered and fell. Apart from the countless universe worlds Yang Kai had repaired over the past few thousand years, he had also placed the 3,000 universe worlds that Mu had left behind in her spacetime river in the various great territories. Not only that, Yang Kai had also restored the universe worlds on the Black Ink battlefield. In light of this, the old tree's vitality had significantly increased, and the number of fruits hanging from it was more than twice of when it was at its prior peak. In the past, it was impossible for the old tree to manifest its figure outside the grand ancient ruins boundary, but now, it could easily do so. Its thick trunk might give off the appearance of an old tree, but it bore no marks to show its age, rather, it seemed much younger than before. It could be said that ever since Yang Kai began repairing the universe worlds, the old tree's days had become more and more comfortable. Old Tree smiled cheerfully at Yang Kai as it stretched out a branch which wrapped around Yang Kai and the various women, before it gradually started glowing green. By the time the glow faded away, Yang Kai and the others had disappeared. In the grand ancient ruins boundary, when Yang Kai and the others reappeared, the old tree gently withdrew its branches wrapped around them, and then sent over 10 seedlings, world tree clones, to Yang Kai with another branch. Be careful on your journey, old tree advised before prompting its strength, sending Yang Kai and the others out of grand ancient ruins boundary. When they reappeared, they were already standing on the edge of the Black Ink battlefield. Yang Kai carefully put away the 10 seedlings as they were necessary for his return journey. This would surely be a long and arduous journey, so without the guidance of Old Tree, even a world creation realm master like him might get lost in the endless void. Drawing on his experience the last time he returned from distant lands, Yang Kai had Old Tree prepare some seedlings in advance. This way, when he ventured deep into the vast, endless void, he could plant the seedlings on some universe worlds he found and use them to contact the old tree. Furthermore, this would also help in strengthening the old tree's foundation, because the universe worlds with world tree clones planted on them would be included into the old tree's teleportation range. All the universe worlds within this range would be imprinted onto old tree's body, manifesting in the form of world fruits. In all likelihood, the world tree's teleportation range would increase with Yang Kai's exploration. Perhaps after Yang Kai found a new universe, he would be able to connect it to the 3,000 worlds and travel freely between them. Yang Kai summoned a warship, whereupon everyone gathered in the cabin. "Husband, which way should we go?" "Let's go this way." "All right then, sit tight." "Right, if we're all traveling outside, what about our children? Their grandfather and grandmother are looking after them, there's no need to worry. Also, it's not like they are kids anymore. Father and mother must be very happy with so many grandsons and granddaughters. It's really envious. But they've gotten old, will they be able to look after them? Their uncle and auntie are also looking after them. That brat Yang Xiao, I've only seen him a few times over the years. Peng. Hey, if you want to talk, just talk. Why are you closing the door? I don't care. Big sister has already given birth to 2, but I've only given birth to 1, I want to have another kid too. Husband, you can't be unfair. This isn't something I can decide, don't tear my clothes, let's talk it out. The end. Marshall Peak, Chapter 60-10, Children. Yang Ji. Yang Su. Get back here. A man scolded as a pair of dragon and phoenix teleported away. The 2 children, looking to be around 12, giggled as they disappeared. Meanwhile, the man slumped his shoulders in exhaustion. A beautiful woman with luscious lips and phoenix-like eyes appeared from behind him as she sighed. Yang Xiao, why didn't you just trap them within your domain? She was none other than Yang Shui, Yang Kai's sister. You think I didn't want to do that? How in the world did these 2 monsters get born? They sensed it before I could even use time principles and escaped. These twins are such a headache. Even adoptive father has a hard time dealing with them. Yang Xiao lamented, tasked with taking care of them while his adoptive father was having another one of his honeymoons. As their uncle, you should already know how capable they are. Their dragon and phoenix bloodlines are much purer than others. If they could manage to use it to suppress you, that would be a good laugh. Yang Shui teased as she patted him on his head. Yang Xiao felt as though a headache was rushing in. In fact, he could have done something about those 2 if he used a lot more of his strength. It was just, these children were too sly. To be more accurate, Yang Su was the cunning one and Yang Ji was the mischievous mastermind. Yang Su would always follow her brother's wishes, and if that meant pranks, that would be. He could not use his full strength because within the compound they were in, there were other children as well. These twins half-siblings. A large number of which were still young and still sleeping. Even when he scolded the 2, he had to keep his voice down. If they all woke up and started crying, all hell would truly break loose. Since both the twins and him could not make a scene, what else could he realistically do? Yang Xiao signed once again and complained. Very funny. Well, not like the world can cause them any issues if they go out and run around. Those 2 schemers just so happen to choose the best time to run away when their grandparents are gone. Yang Shui chuckled, they do resemble you when you were young. Guess that's what it means to be a young dragon. Well, I guess it's best if we tell the others about their escape. What do you mean, resemble me when I was young? I was never that naughty. Yang Xiao quipped, snorting at the idea. But, aren't you going to go after them? If I go, who is going to deal with the aftermath of when all the children wake up? Yang Shui rolls her eyes at the obvious problem they faced. The 2 sighed as they stared out to the sky where those twins ran off to. Yay! We finally got out. Yang Ji, in the form of a small golden phoenix, cheered. He looked to his sister to see her checking on the item they took from their uncle. Yang Su, what did you get? Yang Ji asked, curious as to what that orb was. It was completely black, as though light did not reflect from it. Rather, it seemed as though light itself got absorbed by it to never return. Big brother, I don't really know. But, I think we can ask Uncle Little 11 about it. Out of everyone, he is the only one we can trust. The rest of them will turn us in and force us back home. Yang Su thought for a while before replying. She had already turned to head towards where Little 11 was. Yang Su nodded and they soon, together, manipulated space principles to instantly close the distance to their destination. Little 11, Fong Tian Ci and Thunder Shadow were living quite a distance away from any major cities. In fact, the place they settled on within Void World had been labeled as a restricted zone. Although the whole Black Ink clan mess had been dealt with, there was too much bad blood that could not be washed away. Even if Yang Kai had pardoned Little 11 for his actions, that was not the case for the rest of the world. Even so, the wish of Mu needed to be honored, and Little 11 had to have a chance at normalcy. The best they could do was to keep him out of harm from others who might try to take revenge by setting up this restricted zone. It was not so much that little 11 could not go out. Rather, it was a restricted zone where he would be safe if inside. Nevertheless, to atone for his mistake as MO, he rather stayed inside. Fong Tianci and Thunder Shadow, who were tasked to watch over little 11, naturally stayed by his side. Though they were his observers, after growing up together, they had become more or less friends. The occasional fist or claw exchange still happens, but overall, they were close. Over the years, Yang Kai had visited them in their homes. Sometimes, he would even bring his children here to shave off some of the trio's boredom. It was on these trips that Yang Su and Yang Ji got to know of their uncles. It was also from these trips that they memorized the location and route. When kilometers outside of the restricted zone, Yang Ji raised his arm to stop his sister. He looked around and checked his surroundings, scrutinizing every detail. Phew. Looks like no one has caught up to us yet. Yang Ji smiled and said. Big brother, I don't think anyone would look for us out here. If they wanted to catch us, they would have waited for us inside. Yang Su said, giving him a side eye. No no no. We have to play it safe. Look, before we even get close, we need to avoid Uncle Fong Tianci and Uncle Thunder Shadow's divine sense, right? If they catch on to us, then we'll immediately be sent back. Yang Ji said, convinced that would happen. Then what should we do? I'm pretty sure that their divine sense encompasses the whole restricted zone. I doubt we would be able to sneak past them. Yang Su asked, not understanding her brother's thoughts. Before I answer that, let me ask you, do you think both of us are faster than them? Yang Ji asked, already knowing the answer. If we work together, maybe. We've never really seen them use their full powers before, so I doubt we can beat them in terms of speed. Uncle Fong Tianci is also proficient in the Tao of space. If we were to compare who had better control, him or us, I doubt we would win, Yang Su said while looking at her small white fist clenching and opening. You're right. Actually, no matter how I see it, I don't think we'll be able to beat either of them. Even Uncle Thunder Shadow is ridiculously fast. So, what we need to do is to lure them away. The stratagem known as luring the tiger away from the mountain. Yang Ji said as he puffed up his chest and beat it. The little boy seemed to have thought that he seemed impressive, but his sister had already thought of this. That's far easier said than done. How are we supposed to lure them away? If one leaves, the other will remain. Yang Su shook her head, believing this to be unfeasible. Yang Ji placed his index finger on her lips and smirked. There's where you are wrong, my dear sister. You are forgetting that I have a storage ring with me. Yang Ji said, as though every little detail had already been thought up. Yang Su stood silent and just decided to go with the flow. Marshall Peak, Chapter 6011, Trapped. Within the restricted zone, a man, a black panther and a little boy, sat around a circular table. It was their usual gathering time, where they would enjoy the simplicities in life. Treats and banters were always abound during these gatherings, gathered at the center for whoever wants to take them. Hey, the communication artifact had lit up. What did it say? The little boy asked in wonder. It was obvious that something must have happened for the usual stoic man to suddenly sigh. Fong Tianci sighed again. It's Big Brother's children. 2 of them seem to have escaped from home while their parents are on a honeymoon. Thunder Shadow tilted his head. Wait. They are going on a honeymoon again? Fong Tianci scratched his face. With so many wives, Big Brother does have it rough. Besides, they are most likely not just playing around. They are most likely looking around for materials to build the artifact Big Brother wants. The one he is going to use for that long voyage? Little 11 asked, while in deep thought. Yeah. The trip definitely won't be easy. But, not like there's much we can do about it. Judging from the description of those people he had to deal with, and the taboo realm, it's best to prepare. Fong Tianxi added. He considered joining his big brother, but his priority was to remain by Little Eleven's side. At the same time, all three of them would feel uneasy if they all left the 3,000 worlds. Thus, at one of their gatherings, they had already discussed and decided Fong Tianxi and Thunder Shadow would be staying to guard the 3,000 worlds just in case. Naturally, Little 11 was also present at the scene during these discussions. He had made the active decision to remain here, as this was Mu's final resting place. It was also the least he could do for terrorizing the 3,000 worlds for so long. At this time, all three sensed two familiar auras. They all immediately looked at each other and two pairs of eyes fell on Fong Tianxi. All right. I'll go. Fong Tianxi stood up and leaped, disappearing in an instant. Little 11 and Thunder Shadow both shrugged. They both nodded, as though it was the expected outcome. After all, Little 11 needed to stay within the restricted zone. As for Thunder Shadow, although he was fast, he by no means could hope to beat his second brother. It was naturally by no means that they just wanted to watch the show. Certainly not. Yang Ji and Yang Su could both sense a disturbance in space. They immediately threw out one of the artifacts that Yang Ji had brought with him. It was an array plate. The array plate landed on the space that started to ripple, and it immediately activated. The area it captured was so large that it encompassed at least 10 kilometers. Naturally, that meant whoever was going to appear and the two children would get caught up in this trap at the same time. Yang Ji immediately grabbed hold of Yang Su's hand, and they flew. He took out a token and they immediately escaped from the array. The array plate was made specially to contain whatever was inside. However, it was far from simple. It was made by Grandmaster Ma Fan and Yang Kai. This was a gift to the twins, whereby they would be able to train in. It would create an independent space, whereby the twins would be able to go through different illusionary environments. There were places with sweltering lava pools, there were canyons with astral winds, there were caves of freezing ice. Regardless, even till now, the two had not cleared all regions. Still, this array plate functioned as both a training ground and a means of protection. They could trap their enemies inside and leave them there while they escaped. As for the two, they naturally had a token to escape the array plate. When Yang Ji and Yang Su got out, they looked at each other. They both knew that with Fong Tianxi's abilities, escaping this array was only a matter of time. Still, they could not help but smile since they've trapped him. They both gave each other a high five and Yang Ji said. Okay. That's one down. I don't think Uncle Thunder Shadow will come out anytime soon though. So, we need to just continue onwards. Let's do this as planned. We need to get past the restriction array first. Okay. Yang Su nodded and took out another token. This time, it was a token for the restriction array. In general, this was a special identification token. It could be for the various arrays around Void World. Naturally, this restriction array was no exception, since most of the Yang family would come here from time to time. The two children took out their identification token and placed it against the restriction array. The typically transparent dome suddenly had some blue hue to it. A small hole soon appeared and it quickly enlarged till the side of three men. The two children went in with little regard for the array plate they left behind. The path to the center was straightforward. In fact, a small path within this dense forest would light up in front of them to guide them. This path was not real. It was an illusion created with some board modification made by Little 11. The path was created such that glowing rectangles were painted on the ground. Little 11 even took the effort to make them always perfectly contour the ground, to make it seem as though the ground had been painted over. Any shrubs protruding would be circled, as though they should be watched out for. Yang Ji and Yang Su did not understand how such a thing was made, but that was just what made Uncle 11 more impressive in their hearts. The two continue forward as guided by the path. To say the scenery here was picturesque would be an understatement. With how much time they had, Fang Tianci, Thunder Shadow and Little 11 would decorate their surroundings. It was not an exaggeration to say that everything here had been made. Since, regardless if a blade of grass or dirt had been here, they would have been moved or replaced by any of the three at some point in time. In fact, a common topic of their discussions, if not about cultivation and news, was about their place. Looking at such sites again, with certain mountains having changed location and certain trees being replaced by another breed, Yang Ji and Yang Su had their gazes taken. However, as they moved closer to the center, they remembered what they needed to do and they ceased getting distracted. There, they saw a black panther and a little boy, who looked to be around their age, who they call Uncle. Marshall Peak, Chapter 60-12, Leaving the Restricted Zone. When the twins could be spotted, the two on the table just minded their own business. They had already sensed them before they entered. Naturally, their presence came as no surprise. Thunder Shadow even lazily opened one of his eyes to peek, almost intent on not doing anything. As for Little 11, he waved at the twins to welcome them over. For him, who had always been close to the two, this was a great time to catch up. Yang Ji could not help but look at Yang Su before turning his head back at the two by the table. He was a little taken aback by Thunder Shadow's nonchalance. He had imagined they needed to do something to stop their capture. However, it turned out that nothing really needed to be done. As for Yang Su, she half predicted this outcome. She never believed that Fang Tianci had any true intention of catching up. In fact, she wanted to question her brother, why he had to go this far. It was it not more entertaining to just play along? Seeing that Yang Ji was not planning to move, Yang Su took the initiative to take his hand and bring him forward. The two slowly walked up to the table, where Little 11 asked, "Hey, what are you two doing here?" Thunder Shadow seemed to completely ignore these two. Instead, his attention was fully focused on the outside, as though he was waiting for Fang Tianci to get out of his predicament. Yang Su was the one who answered. "We got this from back home. We were wondering what this is." Yang Ji immediately took the initiative to take out the black orb. His hands were still a little shaky due to nervousness. The moment Little 11 saw the orb, his eyes lit up. He immediately took it into his small hands and smirked. He asked, "Do you have any guess as to what this is?" The twins looked at each other and then back at him to only shake their heads. "If we knew, why would we need to come and look for you?" Little 11's smile widened, as though he had one. He moved his arms around the two, and whispered, "This is a really fun toy that you've brought. I can't believe that you've managed to get a hold of this." The twins' eyes brightened with expectation. They could not wait for him to tell them already. However, before they could push Little 11 for an answer, he pushed the topic aside to further agitate them. "Okay, how about we deal with this later? For now, let's get those two killjoys out of the picture first." Once he said that, the space around him seemed to darken. Even Thunder Shadow was alarmed by this development. Before Thunder Shadow could act, his body was engulfed in darkness. Sticky darkness that he felt his limbs could not maneuver through. He raged, annoyed that this prankster got the best of him. "When did you? Damn it!" A playful voice could be heard from above, "You don't have to get so mad. You've done worse to me and we are all still such best of friends. No. I'll take care of the kids for a while. Not to worry. I'll bring them back." "Friends? You call us friends?" Thunder Shadow roared, but his voice seemed to have gone unheard. Seeming as though Little 11 had disappeared, he scoffed. "Out of all the techniques you could have used, you had to use Abyssal Dome. Do you plan to keep me locked up here until you get back?" Abyssal Dome was a secret technique Little 11 had developed to keep Fang Tianci and Thunder Shadow confined in one space. It worked to a certain extent against Fong Tianci, but it worked too well against Thunder Shadow. The last time Little 11 used it on Thunder Shadow, the latter could not come out until he started begging. Seeing this secret technique again just poured salt into his wounds. Thankfully, crack. After a few minutes had passed, a crack started to form at the top of the dome. It slowly became like a spider web, spreading out. Not wasting a single second, Thunder Shadow rushed out, crashing his head against the weak spot, causing the whole thing to collapse. The sight before him came as no surprise. It was Fong Tianci, who was already waiting with folded arms. The two stared at each other in silence for a while. It was Thunder Shadow who took the initiative to speak. "Why did you not catch them when you were just loitering around?" Fong Tianci simply looked at the direction where the twins and Little 11 had run off to. He shook his head and sighed, just let them be. The thing those two took is something that was meant for Little 11 in the first place. If you're so worried, we could just go and follow them in secret. Thunder Shadow scoffed and then asked, "But, they might leave the restricted zone, you know. Aren't we supposed to keep an eye on Little 11 and ensure that he does not leave? After being with him for so long, we both know that he had no desire to cause harm to any of us. In the first place, this restricted zone is more of keeping the others out than keeping him in. It's fine. I'm actually more interested to see what they plan on doing with that orb. Besides, weren't you the one who tried to persuade him to go out to play?" Fong Tianci sighed as he mounted on top of Thunder Shadow, as if it were natural. Thunder Shadow knew about the artifact. However, he felt it to be strange. There was no need for Little 11 to leave the restricted zone to use it, much less bring the children along with him. He wanted to ask Fong Tianci about his guess as to why this was the case. However, seeing Fong Tianci having no intent of explaining, Thunder Shadow just followed along and started moving. The moment he took his first step, space was split and a void crack appeared. The two, Panther and Human, soon entered. Little 11 was quick to bring Yang Ji and Yang Su out of the restricted zone. It was as if nothing hindered him anymore. Instead of bringing them in any other direction, he brought them to where the twins had supposedly trapped Fong Tianci. The array that had been established from the array plate had already been broken through. There was a huge hole at the top which was slowly closing up. When Yang Ji saw the initial destruction, his heart had dropped. If his array plate got destroyed, who knew what kind of punishment awaited him? His spirit only got lifted after he realized that the array plate had a self-repairing function. Little 11 was quick to point at the array as he said, "Hurry up and keep your toy." Yang Ji and Yang Su looked at him in wonder. They had not seen him in such a hurry before. It was certainly a rare sight to see. They did as they were told. The array token was fished out, allowing for easy access into and through the array. These two quickly went back into the core of the array and shut it down. When the array disappeared with the two children exposed to the outside world, Little 11 immediately appeared beside them. He moved his arm to wrap them in his shoulders, and they soon disappeared. On the group, where they had stood, a small text was carved into the ground, "Heading to the World Tree." You're tuning into the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.